The most unsettling true crime mysteries are those that don't have a clear motive. For the everyday person, there's a natural urge to understand the motives behind criminal acts. In certain cases, though, the motives simply cannot be understood, whether because they're unsolved or because the criminal's psychology doesn't make sense. These cases affect the bedrock of normal society and make us uneasy because of their unsettling impacts. As much as 99% of global internet transactions are carried over undersea fiber cables that span millions of kilometers and are no thicker than a garden hose. These cables have carried information across the globe since 1858, when two ships met in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to connect the landmark first telegram cable between Europe and North American continents. Times have changed since that first telegraph, which took more than 17 hours to travel across the world. Yet the importance of the physical network of cabling has not. Consider the Maria cable, for example. In 2018, this fiber optic cable began transmitting information between Spain and the United States at a rate of up to 160 terabytes per second, or 16 million times faster than the average home internet connection. And the Maria cable is just one of a network of more than 380, which crisscross our oceans and transmit across global boundaries. Fiber optic cables don't just travel undersea, though. They're buried below the surface of major cities across the world. While these cables have long been the method of choice for transmitting data across long distances, their use in regular internet communications is more recent. This is because fiber optic cables are less resilient than traditional internet cables, which are often made of copper. Copper cables can transmit electricity even when they're damaged. However, fiber optic cables are sensitive to any kind of disruption, particularly outside light contamination. Any opening of the insulation which bundles and covers the fiber optic threads can cause issues if they're above ground and exposed to light. For this reason, fiber optic cables on land are often buried rather than strung overhead. This means that fiber optics are primarily deployed in cities where demand is high for faster internet, and the amount of digging that must be done is minimal. These cables are crucial for telecommunications, but they're also startlingly vulnerable. In 2019, CNN reported that there are about 200 undersea cable failures per year, 2/3 of which are caused by humans. The most frequent cause is accidental activities, such as fishing nets, trawling, and ship anchors. Sometimes, though, these outages are purposeful and malicious. Such was the case in April of 2022, when a targeted attack left millions of people in France with connectivity issues. On April 27th, a mysterious person, or persons, deliberately cut crucial buried cables across several sites near the city of Paris, France. The cables connected the residents of Paris to other French cities, including Lyon, Strasbourg, and Lille. Thousands of people were affected by the subsequent connectivity blackout. After a months-long investigation, French utility companies revealed the startling methods of the attack, conclusively proving that this instance was no accident, far from it. Around 10 different companies and ISPs were affected by the attacks, which were reportedly carried out by criminals who were said to have known what they were doing. The managing director of the French Telecoms Federation said the perpetrators targeted what are called backbone cables, which connect network service from Paris to other locations in France in 3 directions. The cutting of these specific cables heavily impacted connectivity, not just in Paris, but across the country. The attackers struck 3 locations simultaneously, or near simultaneously. The French internet company Free 1337 shared photos of the impacted location. In the images, which were posted on Twitter, a ground-level duct which houses underground cables has been opened. The cables, each around an inch in diameter, have been cut in a straight line, which, per Wired magazine, suggests that the attackers used a circular saw or other type of power tool. Most concerningly, though, is the fact that the cables were cut in not just one, but 2 places, and a section in between the 2 cuts was missing. This makes it much more difficult to repair. The cables cannot just be reattached, but in some cases have to be extended. It speaks to a level of preparation. The attacker knew what they were doing and intentionally chose to cause a more severe blackout. In fact, according to a researcher at the University of Oxford, the perpetrators would have needed to know the exact locations of the cable ducts and to carry out the attacks under the cover of night. According to the researcher, this implies a lot of coordination and a few teams of criminals. Despite the public nature of the crime and its aftermath, no one has come forward to claim responsibility for the attack, a fact which has surprised French officials. The most common theory is that a radical ecological group is behind the attacks. In France, more than 140 attacks against 5G and telecom infrastructure were documented in a December 2021 review conducted by an environmental news outlet. However, experts have cautioned that radical environmentalist groups usually attempt to create obvious damage and claim responsibility for their attacks, neither of which were the case with the internet cables. Some news outlets have suggested that the attacks could be related to a new kind of conspiracy theory related to the coronavirus outbreak. In a report published by the US Department of Homeland Security in 2020, top international intelligence experts reported that they were monitoring a number of conspiracy theories linking the spread of COVID-19 to expanded 5G cellular networks. This type of conspiracy is not specific to the US either. In 2020, a British man set fire to a 4G tower because he believed it was a 5G tower that gave people coronavirus. And in 2022, an arson attack in the UK brought thousands of homes offline. However, with no group coming forward to claim responsibility for the attacks, we can only speculate as to why these criminals chose to act the way they did. Experts, such as the French telecommunications director, fear that society will continue to see a rise in these kinds of attacks globally. And although the internet is built with resiliency, data can be rerouted, the intent behind the actions and their economic impact is still very real and very concerning. It was a bizarre crime with a shockingly large impact. In February of 2015, Amsterdam Cheese Museum was the target of a criminal heist costing more than $26,000 US. The item stolen was none other than a bejeweled cheese slicer, billed as the most expensive in the world. The museum, which calls itself the #1 cheese experience in Amsterdam, is located near other tourist attractions in the city. Amsterdam is a logical site for a cheese museum. The country famously produces Gouda cheese as well as dozens of other local varieties. The museum contains dioramas on the process of making Gouda, as well as old instruments such as cheese curd cutters and a milk machine. The building itself boasts displays on Dutch cheesemaking, as well as tall shelves with a variety of cheeses for sale and to taste. According to reviews, most of the museum's main floor is taken up by the cheese shop, and displays are located in the basement, which was also the site of the 2015 crime. In 2007, a company which produces cheesewares teamed up with Argentinian designer Rodrigo Otatsu to create a new cheese slicer. Bosca, which was founded in 1896, is one of the only companies focused on specifically producing cheese accessories, such as fondue sets, slicers, and knives. Although they are not commonly used outside of Europe, cheese slicers are particularly frequently used in the Netherlands to cut thin slices of cheese and expose them to the air. The contact with oxygen aerates the cheese and enhances the flavor. Rodrigo Otatsu, Bosca's partner in the luxury slicer production, is a jewelry designer known for extravagant designs. According to the Otatsu website, their brand is especially popular for their collaboration with Swarovski crystals, and their design has been worn by celebrities including Lady Gaga, Madonna, Tyra Banks, and Sarah Jessica Parker. The cheese slicer, which the partnership ultimately produced, was studded with more than 220 individual diamonds around the handle. The slicer was designed for exhibition and was shown at the Millionaire Fair in Russia, before ultimately making its way to Amsterdam. It was due to display in the United States in 2015, including at the Chicago Housewares Show and the Amsterdam Affair Party in New York City. Once at the museum, the cheese slicer was displayed in the basement, along with the cheese tools and dioramas. However, sources have reported that the glass display case was only locked with a basic mechanism, like what's used in stores to protect electronics. It was no match for a skilled thief. In stills released by the museum's CCTV footage, the unidentified criminal is seen opening the display case and removing the slicer. The perpetrator's back is to the camera, so their face cannot be seen, and they're wearing a nondescript black coat and gray hat. No one has ever come forward in this crime, and Dutch police have not released any leads. Bosca's CEO released a statement calling the slicer the finest and most expensive in the world. He told news outlets that Bosca was doing its best to make the world familiar with the experience of eating cheese. In his statement to the press, he said that, quote, "Our core business is to manufacture and sell cheese wares, but we also engage in creative collaborations with the purpose of making cheese cool." This was the case with the Otatsu slicer. Over the course of time, many have shown interest in purchasing the shiny slicer, but the Cheese Museum wanted to display the slicer to the general public for all to admire, and we provided them with that opportunity. At first, we thought the theft was a cheesy joke because, after all, we're only a month from April Fool's Day, but that was not so. Despite the publicity afforded to the theft of the cheese slicer, including Bosca's offer to provide a free fondue set to anyone who comes forward, the implement has never been returned. Its location today remains an unusual mystery, one that haunts cheese lovers across the globe. 36-year-old mother Amanda Doreen Dean went missing from her home in Collins, Ohio on July 11, 2017. Amanda left behind 4 sons and has not been heard from or seen since. According to Amanda's family, her boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, Fred Rear, was violent and abusive. Police were called to her home on Wells Road at least once, in January of 2017, to respond to an altercation between Amanda and her boyfriend. According to the police report, Amanda first told the deputy that she hurt herself with a hammer when it fell, and it hit her in the eye. She eventually admitted that Fred had assaulted her, but said that she didn't want to file charges. Later, she told her sister that her boyfriend had given her a black eye and threatened to take her life. The situation was grim. An image on Facebook that claims to show Amanda's comments from 2017 seems to confirm the desperation that she felt. In it, Amanda says she's living in Collins, Ohio, which she equates to hell. She tells another commenter that she doesn't have a place to stay if she leaves Collins, and concludes with, quote, "I'm stuck in hell till the devil kills me, I guess." Despite her tumultuous personal life, though, Amanda was a devoted mother to her sons. Joshua Dean, who's active in running a Facebook account for his mom's case, also called her a great person and an amazing friend. He also shared descriptions of the abuse that his mom faced at the hands of her boyfriend at the time, a man named Fred. Joshua wrote that the man would constantly abuse his mother and treat her worse than anything I've ever seen. At the time, he added that she was too young to do anything to help, but he's frustrated by what he believes to be ineffective treatment Amanda's case received from the local sheriff's office. In July of 2017, just a day after she was reported missing, the local county sheriff's office closed Amanda's case. They said that she'd been found at a safe house for survivors of violence, and for her own protection, the sheriff said that he could not divulge to her family where she was staying. Though they accepted this at the time, Amanda's family was worried that they hadn't heard from her themselves. Now, more than 5 years later, they're calling for her case to be reopened. According to Amanda's son, Joshua, the sheriff has been tight-lipped about when and where they spoke to her. He said that they didn't even confirm face-to-face that she was safe and in the shelter. Her family is concerned about intel about Amanda's safety being falsified, or that she may have lied due to threats from her boyfriend. As of December of 2022, the family is publicly calling for the sheriff's office to provide proof of life of Amanda, either now or from 2017. Amanda's mother, Carolyn Takar, submitted a request to the department for this information. In response, on December 21st, 2022, the sheriff's office reported that they officially reopened an investigation into Amanda's whereabouts. According to a press release, quote, "Mrs. Dean entered into a safe house in 2017 and has not had contact with her family since. We've had conversations and a meeting with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations. and requested that they review and continue the investigation. We've provided BCI with all of the information available for them to review. The Bureau of Criminal Investigations is set to be responsible for the next steps in the case, but as of February of 2023, there have been no formal updates. Frustrated with the lack of official response, Amanda's loved ones have been coordinating and gathering information in a Facebook group, where they've shared information about the search and the lack of cooperation they perceive from the sheriff's office. Joshua has said in a comment that the sheriff is always, quote, too busy to talk despite repeated requests from the family. Group members have also shared information from local domestic violence shelters, which showed that their policies don't align with the sheriff's claims. In addition, they've posted police records from Amanda's search, which show how the department failed to follow its own policy in a missing person case. Amanda's case is a tragic and unsettling mystery, and an example of how the failures of local law enforcement can impact lives. Anyone with information about her whereabouts is asked to contact 1-855-BCI-OHIO. The Facebook group dedicated to Amanda's case is public and open to all, and it's called Help Find Amanda Dean. Emperor Tamarind monkeys with their distinctive white beards are a small tree-dwelling primate that are particularly popular in zoos across the United States. The monkeys weigh just 1 pound at adulthood and are native to South America. They live with extended family groups and are light enough to forage for food on the very tips of delicate tree branches. In the wild, these small creatures live with up to 15 others. That's why zoos often have multiple emperor tamarinds living together, such as the Dallas Zoo in Texas. The Dallas Zoo, the oldest and largest zoo in Texas, was founded with just 2 deer and 2 mountain lions in 1888. Today, it houses over 2,000 animals from 400 species. It's open 364 days per year and hosts more than 1 million visitors annually. Its staff and supporters are dedicated to animal conservation and education. And in early 2023, the Dallas Zoo was targeted by an unusual criminal who had one specific thing on their mind. He wanted to own primates for himself. On January 30th, 2023, zookeepers working with the monkeys at the Dallas Zoo quickly realized that 2 emperor tamarinds named Bella and Finn were absent from their enclosure. There was also a cut made in the fencing surrounding the tamarin habitat, through which the pair was believed to have escaped. It was first thought that Bella and Finn left their habitat on their own and would be wandering around the zoo grounds. However, a thorough search on January 30th did not reveal any sign of the duo. Zoo administrators called police, and working together, the groups confirmed their next theory, that someone had intentionally taken the tamarinds. The Dallas Zoo immediately had a suspect. According to news reports, an unknown individual had aroused concern at the zoo in the previous weeks. A man had reportedly been spotted entering staff buildings at the zoo, and had been asking a number of questions about moving and caring for some of the animals, including the tamarin monkeys and the zoo's clouded leopard. The zoo was able to find surveillance images of the man and released him to the public on the afternoon of the 30th. On January 31st, police received a tip that allowed them to safely locate Bella and Finn at a vacant home about 15 miles south of the zoo. The tip was submitted by a church member who recognized the man in the video as someone who frequented a vacant property, which the church owned. It's unconfirmed if this is the same place where Bella and Finn were located, but in the home with Bella and Finn, police found several cats and pigeons, as well as feeder fish and fish food that had been stolen from the zoo earlier that month. However, the man was not there. The search for the mystery criminal continued. Then there was a break in the case. In early February, a man visited the Dallas World Aquarium and asked a number of strange questions about the animals there. The employee, recognizing the man from the zoo's surveillance footage, called the police. The culprit was apprehended a few blocks from the aquarium and was brought into custody, where he confessed to an unusual string of crimes. The man, whose name was Davian Irwin, was a 24-year-old Dallas local and a self-proclaimed animal lover. Davian told police that on the night of January 29th, he waited until after dark before jumping a fence and cutting a hole in the mesh of the tamarin enclosure. He then took the 2 monkeys out of the zoo and traveled on the city's rail with them to the vacant home where he said he kept his animals. Davian said that he wanted to have the monkeys for his own. Alarmingly, he told investigators that if released, he would steal more animals. Since his arrest, he's also been linked to a number of odd events that took place at the Dallas Zoo in the previous weeks, including stolen fish food, which the zoo did not report at the time, and the slashing of a hole in another monkey habitat. Most troublingly, Davian said that he'd tried to liberate the zoo's clouded leopard, Nova, who was discovered missing from her habitat on January 13th. Nova was found in the zoo later that day, but her absence caused a whole park closure as zookeepers frantically searched for the apex predator. Davian said that he cut open Nova's enclosure and wanted to take her with him, but he was only able to pet her briefly before she got away. Davian is currently being held in jail while police continue to investigate his culpability in these and other cases in the Dallas area. An endangered vulture died at the zoo in unusual circumstances in January, but Davian has not been specifically linked to that case. Police also want to check with other animal habitats in the area to ensure that Davian didn't attempt to liberate any of their residents. As of February of 2023, Davian's being charged with 6 counts of animal cruelty and 2 counts of burglary. He's not yet been sentenced, so it's unclear what kind of prison time he'll be required to serve for these crimes. The strangest fate of Olga Mauger is Wyoming's oldest cold case. The whereabouts of the beautiful young woman, often dubbed the Disappearing Bride, have been unknown since September 17, 1934, nearly 100 years. 21-year-old Olga and her new husband, Carl Mauger, had a whirlwind courtship lasting just 2 weeks. Olga was a red-haired beauty who'd grown up fishing and hunting in the local area. Carl, rather interestingly, had a complicated romantic history. Before meeting Olga in August of 1934, Carl had been courting another local woman named Ella for 5 years. Back then, an eternity to string someone along without marrying them. Ella was reportedly eager to marry, but Carl kept putting off a wedding night. He was at a dance with Ella when he first saw Olga, and that was that. Although Carl ended up marrying Olga, Ella was far from pleased with the situation. According to Olga's sister Edith, Ella even sent the newlyweds a letter threatening to take her own life. Edith said that the letter caused Olga to greatly regret her marriage to Carl. She remembered that while Olga was packing for her honeymoon, she even begged Edith to join them, which would have been very odd. Edith told her sister that, quote, 3 people never go on a honeymoon, and later recalled Olga's sad expression after the fact. On September 11, 1934, Olga and Carl set out for their honeymoon, which was to be full of hunting, fishing, and hiking. In particular, the couple were hunting elk and had traveled to a campsite in the Wyoming mountains. On September 17th, after 6 days, the couple once again left their campsite in order to search for elk. Carl reportedly suggested that the pair should climb a small ridge to search from a higher vantage point, but Olga said that she was tired and that Carl should go ahead. Although this was strange, as Olga was more versed with the outdoors, Carl left her sitting on a rock and climbed upwards. Olga had with her a bag of sandwiches that the pair had packed, and it was possible she might snack while she waited. She was wearing tan hunting pants and lace boots, and carried with her a small hatchet. When Carl returned to the spot between 20 and 30 minutes later, his wife was gone. There were no traces of her to be seen. According to some sources, the paper bag which had held the sandwiches was left behind, but it was empty. Carl called out to his wife, but there was no response. He quickly returned to the hunting camp where there was a phone and called for help. Among the many responders was a ranger named Sonny Allen, who remembered getting the call to travel up the pass at about 1 p.m. on the 17th. Carl told Sonny and the other searchers his story. He walked up the hill, Olga waited, and then he came back and she was gone. They hadn't had a fight and there was no reason for her to leave on her own. She was an avid outdoors woman and could hold her own against anything that happened in that short time. He didn't hear her call out or any signs of a scuffle. She just vanished. Sonny later wrote that, quote, Olga was an expert in the forest and everyone knew that she couldn't get lost. Something strange was clearly afoot. Sonny and the other rangers, along with Carl, put together a search party that grew to include over 300 people, including dozens of workers from Jackson Lake, game wardens, police officers, and even some Native Americans from a local community, who were expert wilderness trackers. The police also brought trained bloodhounds to search the area, yet despite all of this effort, no one could pick up on Olga's trail. As the night approached and the weather grew cold, searchers started to fear for Olga's safety. She was not dressed to spend the night, and even the most experienced individual like herself could be susceptible to Wyoming's rugged and unpredictable natural forces. The search continued into the following days and even weeks, until an early snowstorm cut off the group. Without a trace of Olga, Carl was the natural first suspect. The county attorney, Wilford W. Nielsen, held him for 2 months for questioning in Olga's case. Although Carl's story never changed, some people thought that it didn't make much sense. If something happened to Olga, Carl should have been able to hear her yell or otherwise make noise. Even more concerningly, the searchers from a local tribe reportedly observed that the hill which Carl said he had climbed should have kept him in full view of the spot that she was sitting, even when he was at the top. According to the local paper, the searchers pointed out that although the country is rugged, it is open, and Carl was in full view of the place where he claimed he left his wife, until he reached a small path where he said he turned around. This information was extremely concerning, but without any evidence, Wilford eventually had to release Carl without charging him. Carl did return that spring to the same pass in order to look for further information about Olga, perhaps indicating that he truly cared for her and wanted to find her. However, after 7 years with no trace, he got an official divorce. Carl then remarried another woman, none other than Ella, the woman who he'd been seeing before Olga, who reportedly wrote her that threatening letter. Carl and Ella were married for years until he passed away in 1978, at the age of 72. Olga's sister, Edith, knew about the letter Ella had written and believed that Ella did influence her sister. However, rather than foul play, she suspected that Olga had been so upset by the letter that she wanted to leave her marriage entirely, and so left of her own free will. According to this theory, Olga would have just had to slip away from Carl and travel a short distance to the nearby road, where she could have hitched a ride to start a new life. This could explain why the search party found no traces of Olga, and why no remains have ever been found. There were some unverified, unconfirmed reports of a woman having been seen along the road, but there was no solid proof. For years, hunters in the area kept an eye out for Olga's remains, but nothing has been found. Olga would be more than 100 years old today, but she does have an open missing person case with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, or NAMAS. Anyone with information about the strange disappearance of Olga Mauger can call Detective Jason Cause at 307-332-5611 and reference case number C1502025. Having a child go missing has to be one of the worst experiences a parent can go through, especially if the case remains unsolved and they're never found. An even worse experience, though, is when they go missing and are later found deceased. And although this brings some sense of closure, it does nothing to quell the sense of loss that is felt. This is what the family of 19-year-old Kanika Jenkins is going through, after she mysteriously disappeared during a night out in September of 2018. And although the case has now been closed, they still have many questions that remain unanswered. Kanika is described by her family as bright with a beautiful smile. She was close with her family, especially her mother, Teresa Martin, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, for which she underwent surgery in 2017. On the 8th of September 2018, Kanika received some good news when she learned that she had landed a job at a nursing home in her hometown of Chicago. She told her mother that she and 3 of her friends were going out that night to celebrate, stating that they would be seeing a movie and going bowling. The last time that Teresa saw her daughter was as she left the house at around 11 p.m. that night. She had borrowed Teresa's car, but wasn't really heading to the cinema or a bowling alley. Instead, she drove to the Crown Plaza Hotel, where her friends were waiting for her. The group of friends arrived at the hotel at around 1 p.m., as is evidenced by CCTV footage that shows them entering the building via one of the side entrances. What followed was a night of dancing, drinking, and socializing. most of which was captured on cell phones as they shared their night out live on Facebook and Snapchat. While they were having a good time, it became clear in some of the videos that the women were receiving some unwanted attention from some of the men at the party. They were told to back off on multiple occasions, but this didn't deter the men from openly flirting. Kanika's sister stated that she received a text from her at around 1:30, and although it isn't known what was said in the text, this is the last time that anyone heard from her, and soon the night would take a tragic turn. A Facebook Live video shows the group of women partying in a hotel room, thought to be on the hotel's 9th floor, and in the footage, a woman is talking directly to the camera. But in the reflection of her mirrored sunglasses, Kanika can be seen sitting on the far side of the room. About half an hour later, Kanika posted a video of her own to Snapchat, in which she's seen standing in one of the hotel's bathrooms. Following this, she returned to the party, but the group decided they'd had enough and left the room at around 3 a.m. The group exited the room, but as they did so, Kanika realized that she'd left her phone and car keys behind. There are conflicting accounts about what happened next, as some people say her friends went back into the room to retrieve her possessions, leaving her waiting in the hallway, while others claim that she was waiting in the hotel's lobby. Whatever the case may be, when Kanika's friends returned, she was nowhere to be found, and they immediately started to worry since she was heavily intoxicated. Strangely, the group of friends took nearly 20 minutes before they returned, and it isn't known why they decided to leave Kanika waiting by herself. As soon as they realized that she was missing, the 3 friends started searching the hotel but had no luck finding her. With no other option, they decided to call Teresa at around 4 a.m. to ask whether she had arrived at the house, since they may have decided to go home alone. But Teresa informed them that she hadn't seen her daughter, and so the friends drove to her house, picked Teresa up, and brought her back to the hotel to look for Kanika. Teresa was immediately doubtful of the friends' version of events, since it was obvious that they had been drinking, and she believed they were under the influence of illegal substances. They then informed her that Kanika had also been drinking, but claimed that she had only had 1 drink all night. Teresa knew that even 1 drink could cause her to become intoxicated, since she wasn't used to drinking alcohol, and her fears worsened that something had happened to her. The next logical step would be to look through the hotel's security footage, as it would be simple enough to track anyone in the building, but for some reason, hotel staff refused and told Teresa that she needed to file a missing person report first, and only then could a police officer look at the footage. Frustrated at the lack of cooperation, Teresa decided to call 911 at around 7:15 a.m., but she had no luck here either, as the dispatcher told her to go home and wait, suggesting that Kanika was likely passed out in one of the hotel rooms, and that her friends were lying about her being missing. Kanika never returned home, and the next day, her family was finally able to file a missing person report. Investigators arrived at the hotel, and they were informed by the hotel staff that they had already looked through the CCTV security footage, and that Kanika was nowhere to be seen. A search was immediately launched, and the rooms in the hotel were searched, as was the immediate area around the building, but no sign of Kanika was found. Almost 9 hours later, at around 10 p.m., one of the officers decided to look through the security footage himself, and he quickly found footage of Kanika as she stumbled through the hotel's halls. The timestamp on the footage showed that at 3:20 a.m., Kanika was walking through the hotel, possibly looking for her friends or the exit, but she seemed disoriented and unsteady on her feet, clearly very intoxicated. The footage shows her walking out of an elevator on one of the lower floors, after which she walks back upstairs and stumbles down another hallway. She then accidentally walks into a men's bathroom before finding herself in the hotel's large kitchen where guests were not allowed, since it was under renovation at the time. She's then seen walking to the back of the kitchen and out of sight towards a walk-in freezer that was kept running as it was serving as an extra food storage area. At around 1 a.m., officers finally found Kanika inside the freezer, where she had succumbed to hypothermia. She had been in the freezer for around 20 hours, and given that temperatures inside can drop to well below 0, she had been deceased for some time. She was found lying on the freezer's floor with 1 shoe missing, and officers described her as being completely frozen. It was determined that her passing was an accident, since she likely opened the freezer door and couldn't get out again after shutting it, The autopsy showed that she was indeed intoxicated, and that she had prescription medication in her system that she was not supposed to be taking. The case had seemingly been solved, but Teresa and other members of Kanika's family believe there's more to the story than meets the eye. This sentiment has been echoed by many other people who were following the case, with some suggesting that her friends had a hand in her demise. Others have speculated that she was lured into the freezer by one of the hotel's staff members, who then locked the door behind her, or that staff members altered the security footage to omit the fact that she was being followed through the halls while she was looking for a way out. But most people believe that the footage tells the whole story, and that Kanika had simply wandered into the freezer by accident. Teresa would later file a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel, stating that if she had been allowed to review the security footage, they might have found Kanika in time to save her life. The suit was eventually settled, but the terms of the settlement have never been made public. In some true crime cases, investigators try to find a motive for the crime, but in many instances there doesn't seem to be one. Sometimes this is because the criminal targeted the wrong person by mistake, or it might just be a crime of opportunity that didn't intentionally target one specific person. In the strange case involving Elizabeth Barazza, a 29-year-old woman from Tomball, Texas, investigators are struggling to make sense of her murder, since she didn't seem to have any enemies and was well liked by her community. To make matters even more frustrating, Elizabeth's attacker was caught on CCTV security cameras on multiple occasions while carrying out the attack, but they've still not been identified, and since there were no other witnesses, there's no telling whether it will ever be solved. The incident occurred on the 25th of January, 2019, when Elizabeth was getting ready to start a garage sale at her house at around 7 a.m. This wasn't the first time that she'd held a garage sale at her house, since she did so every year, but this time things would turn out very differently. Elizabeth's husband, Sergio, wasn't home at the time, since he left for work at around 6:48 a.m. He was working for a flooring company where he was employed as a carpet installer, and just minutes after he left, his wife would lose her life. CCTV footage from the area shows a dark-colored pickup truck driving towards Elizabeth's home, and eventually it's parked across the street, where the driver watched Elizabeth with the truck's engine still running. In the next piece of footage that was obtained from the incident, the driver of the truck can be seen approaching Elizabeth while she's standing in her driveway. They're wearing a loose-fitting jacket or robe, and it isn't clear whether they're male or female. For a few seconds, the two seem to have a conversation, and it almost seems as though they know each other, but just a few moments later, the unthinkable happens. The attacker takes something out of their jacket, and as soon as Elizabeth sees the item, she immediately takes a step back, as if she's frightened of whatever it is. We then learn that the item is a firearm, as the attacker takes aim and fires, ending Elizabeth's life on her own driveway. They then turn around and run back to their truck, fleeing the area as quickly as they can. Strangely, the truck can be seen returning to the house a few minutes later, as if the attacker wanted to make sure that Elizabeth hadn't gotten up, and this has led many people to believe that this was a contract killing. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage of the incident is rather grainy, since the camera was far away from Elizabeth's house, and it's impossible to identify the attacker. One of Elizabeth's neighbors, Candy Ellis, heard the firearm being discharged and immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they found that Elizabeth was still alive, and they very quickly arranged for her to be taken to Memorial Hermann Hospital, where doctors would do their best to save her life, but she passed away a few hours later. The crime would send shockwaves through the neighborhood, as no one could understand why Elizabeth would be targeted. She was a kind person who volunteered at the very same hospital where she passed away, and the fact that she was attacked in her own driveway made other residents in the area feel very uneasy, since there was no telling whether this was a random crime that could be repeated at any time. The Harris County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation into the attack, and they had a strong suspicion that Elizabeth knew her attacker. Hence, Sergio was interviewed first, followed by other residents that knew the couple. There was also a strong suspicion that the crime was carried out by more than one person. An investigator stated that they were certain that someone in the area had at least some knowledge of the perpetrator. The investigation was further hampered by the fact that no clues were left behind at the scene. There's also been speculation that Elizabeth's attacker handed her something before discharging their weapon, and many people believe this to be a note that's being kept from the public by investigators. When surveillance cameras in the area were checked, the vehicle was identified as possibly a Nissan Frontier Pro 4X. Some of Elizabeth's neighbors stated that this truck was driving around the neighborhood the previous night, and it's possible that the attacker was looking for the best spot from where to carry out their plan. Investigators believe that Elizabeth's killer is a woman, based on the attacker's size and gait as they approached her, but this has obviously not been confirmed and remains speculation for now. More CCTV footage would later be released, this time from Elizabeth and Sergio's own doorbell camera. And while the crime itself isn't captured, it did provide investigators with a small piece of audio in which Elizabeth can be heard greeting her attacker, saying good morning. This has led many people to believe that she didn't actually know her attacker, or that she didn't recognize them, spawning theories that the attacker was wearing some kind of disguise, probably a mask. At present, Elizabeth's case remains unsolved, and a $20,000 reward is being offered to anyone with information that leads to Elizabeth's attacker's arrest. If you have any information on this case, you're asked to get in touch with the Houston branch of Crime Stoppers. The case involving the disappearance of 31-year-old doctor Sneha Ann Phillips is one that's left many people scratching their heads, since she vanished on the same day that the 9/11 attacks were carried out, and it isn't known whether she was one of the people who lost their lives in one of the buildings, or if she disappeared via some other means. It's now been 22 years since she mysteriously vanished, and investigators are no closer to solving the mystery, since there are many conflicting accounts of Sneha's actions that day, as well as differing descriptions of the type of person that she was. The day before she disappeared, Sneha spoke to her mother via a messaging app for more than 2 hours, during which she recounted a night out that she'd recently had, and told her about the plans that she'd made for the upcoming week. It's also known that she spent time tending to her plants inside her apartment in Manhattan, specifically her orchids, and that later that afternoon, she was caught on security cameras inside a department store with another woman while she did some shopping. This is the only known footage of Sneha before she vanished. In still images of the footage, she can be seen browsing through racks of clothing, and she eventually ended up purchasing a dress, some lingerie, shoes, and linen for her bed. What happened to Sneha after this is one big mystery that's given rise to many theories, as she was never seen again. The problem with every one of these theories is that there's no evidence to back them up, and at best it remains mere speculation. Sneha's husband, Ron, stated that he arrived home from his shift at the Jacobi Hospital and realized that she wasn't there. But this wasn't unusual, since she often stayed out without notifying him. When he woke up the next morning, she still hadn't come home, but even then he wasn't concerned, as this wasn't unusual behavior. When he received news about the attack on the Twin Towers, though, he became very concerned and started contacting friends and family members, none of whom had heard from Sneha or had any idea where she may be. The leading theory in her disappearance is that Sneha also got word of the attack and rushed to the scene to help, since she was a doctor, but she lost her life at the scene. Her family firmly believe this to be the case, and they consider her to be a selfless hero who lost her life while attempting to save lives. But not everyone is convinced that this is the case, since some of the details of her life before her disappearance have painted her in a different light, and not all of it is very flattering. It would come to light that Sneha had been having issues with alcohol use that resulted in her contract with the Cabrini Medical Center not being renewed. She had recently started a new job at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Staten Island, but she'd been suspended since she failed to attend sessions with a substance abuse counselor, and her life at home with Ron wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. The couple had been having issues related to Sneha staying out late all night without a word as to where she was or who she was spending time with. It's also been reported that she often brought women home after a night out, and on one occasion, she was caught in a compromising situation with one of these women by her brother, John. Investigators also stated that she and Ron had a heated argument outside of a courtroom after she pleaded not guilty to filing a false complaint against one of her coworkers. The argument ended with Sneha leaving abruptly, clearly fuming at whatever was said between her and her husband. But even these details are sketchy at best, as Sneha's family, including Ron, have now stated that these claims have been falsified and that she never struggled with illegal substances or alcohol abuse. Ron has also claimed that Sneha's nights out never caused a problem in their marriage since they weren't in the habit of living a conservative lifestyle. They've also claimed that many of these details were merely fabricated by investigators, though they haven't stated why they believe this would be done. At first, Sneha was added to a list of victims who lost their lives during the 9/11 attacks, but her name was then removed after details of her professional and personal life came to light. Added to this was the fact that there was no evidence that she was present at the Twin Towers that morning, and it's thought that she may have disappeared the night before. Sneha was officially declared deceased on the 10th of September 2004, since no evidence could be found that she was still alive. Her family was devastated at the news that her name had been removed from the 9/11 victims list, and decided to fight the ruling with her mother, stating that she finds it more peaceful to think that she lost her life while attempting to help others. They got their wish in 2008, when Sneha's name was returned to the victim list, with the judge stating that it was far more likely that she lost her life there than any of the other theories that had been put forward. Still, many alternate theories remain, and many people believe that Sneha didn't choose to disappear of her own accord, since her passport and bank cards were found in her apartment after the fact. Others think that her husband Ron had something to do with her strange disappearance, but investigators have questioned him thoroughly, and he's been ruled out as a suspect. He would also make concerted efforts to find her, even employing a private investigator, but to no avail. Some of the investigators involved in Sneha's case have stated that it's unlikely that her case will ever be solved, since there just isn't sufficient evidence to point them in the right direction, and any time spent on her case would be better spent on cases that are actually solvable. There is a theory that Sneha did in fact decide to disappear on her own, and that she used the 9/11 attacks as the perfect distraction to do so. Then there's the fact that she was seen in a department store with another woman the day before she disappeared. While investigators don't consider this woman to be a suspect, they believe she may have information that could be relevant to the case, but she's not been identified and has not come forward with any information. Currently, Sneha has officially been listed as a 9/11 victim, a fact that has brought her family a lot of comfort and closure. But since there's no solid proof that this is the case, many people still feel uneasy about this ruling. Efforts are currently being made to identify more victims of the attacks using DNA analysis, and it may just turn out that Sneha was indeed present that day. But until then, her disappearance remains a mystery, with more questions than answers. 18-year-old Kelsey Smith graduated from Shawnee Mission West High School in May of 2007, and at the time of her disappearance had been in a relationship with her boyfriend for 6 months. It was for this reason that she went to a Target store in her hometown of Overland, Kansas on the 2nd of June at around 7 p.m., since she wanted to buy him a gift to celebrate the occasion. And in surveillance footage from the store, she can be seen arriving and walking through the store's automatic double doors. After choosing the items that she wanted to buy, she made her way to one of the registers and can be seen paying before leaving, and this would be the last time that she was seen alive. What wasn't known at first was that this footage showed something far more sinister that would eventually bring her case to a close. Kelsey's mother, Missy, later told investigators that she spoke to her daughter on the phone while she was still inside the store, and at that point, everything seemed normal. She was expected to be home shortly, but when her family was unable to get a hold of her, they started to worry that she may have run into some kind of trouble. Kelsey was known to respond to text messages and phone calls very quickly, and when she didn't do so that night, alarm bells started ringing among her family members. They would eventually decide to report her as missing later that night, after they were still unable to get a hold of her. Witnesses described seeing Kelsey in the Target store's parking lot at around 7:07 p.m., but they were unable to say what happened to her after that. A search was quickly organized, but she was nowhere to be seen in the immediate area around the store. It wouldn't be until 4 hours later that her car was found across the street, where it had been left in a Macy's store parking lot, and when it was searched, investigators found her wallet, her purse, and the gift that she had bought for her boyfriend at the Target store inside. But her cell phone was missing. Since she would have never left these items unattended intentionally, investigators started to believe that she may have been abducted from the Target store parking lot, after being transported elsewhere by an unknown person. This prompted them to look at CCTV surveillance footage from the Target store parking lot, and what they discovered was chilling. Kelsey could be seen walking towards her car after exiting the store, but investigators noticed a flash that seemed to travel towards her car, and they quickly surmised that this was, in fact, a person running in her direction. They believed that this was likely the person responsible for her abduction, and so they decided to look at footage from inside the store. At first, nothing jumped out to them as unusual, but that's when they noticed that one particular man could be seen in every aisle that she was on. This man never came too close to Kelsey, and he never made any attempts to talk to her, but investigators noticed that he kept glancing over at her, as if he was keeping a close eye on her, and he didn't seem very interested in any of the items on the shelves. Cameras outside the store captured the man as he exited the store, and investigators released this image to the public in hopes that he would be identified, though there was no evidence that he was responsible for Kelsey's disappearance at this point. In the meantime, forensic investigators dusted Kelsey's car for fingerprints and found a set that didn't belong to her on one of the seatbelts. Efforts were also being made to obtain Kelsey's cell phone records, but this took a few days since her provider was reluctant to release this information. When they did eventually do so, it was found that Kelsey's phone pinged off a tower about 20 miles from the Target store in an area near Longview Lake in Grandview. This area was searched, and this is when her family's worst fears were confirmed, when she was found deceased in a wooded area. It was found that her life had been ended due to asphyxiation with her own belt, and that she had been assaulted. The investigation then started to pick up pace when a man contacted the police to say that he recognized the man in the security footage, stating that he believed it was his neighbor, 26-year-old Edwin Roy Hall. It's been speculated that Hall followed Kelsey through the store with the intention of abducting her, and after she left the store, he followed her into the parking lot. Here, he produced a firearm and forced her into her own vehicle before ordering her to drive to Longview Lake, where he ended her life. Hall was tracked down and taken into custody on the 6th of June. He was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with Kelsey's disappearance. He even went as far as offering to have his DNA and fingerprints taken to prove his innocence. But when he was confronted with the fingerprint evidence found in Kelsey's car, he knew that he'd been caught, and the following year, on the 23rd of July, he decided to plead guilty to both charges. It would also come to light that Hall had harassed another woman on a previous occasion. The woman, a waitress, told investigators that he had harassed her while she was serving him, and after finishing his meal, he fled without paying his bill. Knowing that he would be found guilty thanks to evidence against him, Hall decided to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty, and he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Given the opportunity to speak after his sentence was handed down, Hall stated that he couldn't find the right words to say, and added that he was very sorry for what he had done. His lawyer also pointed to the fact that he had a very difficult childhood growing up, but this did little to change the public opinion of the murderer, who will not see the outside of a prison again. A 911 call can prove invaluable during a missing person investigation. But in the case of a mysterious disappearance of 30-year-old Kaylin Lauder from Utah in 2014, her 911 call has caused some confusion, as people believe it proves that her state of mind was far from normal. In the time leading up to her disappearance, Kaylin was temporarily working as a dog walker, but otherwise found herself unemployed after she lost her job as a social worker at a local boys' school. Her family stated that she was looking to turn over a new leaf in her life, and on the day that she vanished, she was planning to make a few changes to her resume, walk her dog, and clean the condo that she was living in. But the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance and her passing started on the previous day. Just before 9 p.m. on the 26th of September, Kaylin called 911 to report that a fight had broken out in a clubhouse near her condo, and that there were firearms involved. Police officers were dispatched to the scene, but when they arrived, they found that a wedding reception was being held in the clubhouse and that there had been no fight. Guests at the reception also assured the officers that there were no firearms in the building, and it was chalked up as an innocent mistake. Kaylin would dial 911 again later that evening, but she hung up without saying anything. When a dispatcher called her back, she stated that she didn't need help, but added that her roommate thought that she was delusional and acting paranoid. The dispatcher would later state that Kaylin seemed confused and that the statements she was making seemed nonsensical. Police officers were sent to her condo to make sure that she was all right, but when they arrived, her roommate told them that she had gone out. The most disconcerting of Kaylin's 911 calls came in the following morning at 8:18 a.m. In the call, which has been released to the public, Kaylin can be heard giving her address to the dispatcher and then repeating it for verification. But while confirming her phone number, she suddenly yells for someone to get out of her house.
No, I don't. I just know that there's an intruder in my house.
You don't know who they are?
No, I don't.
She tells the dispatcher that there's an intruder in her house, but when she asked if she knows the person, she stated that she doesn't, but that she knows there is someone there. She tells the dispatcher that she thinks there's more than one person in her house, since she can hear them talking, adding that she heard one of the intruders saying, "Hey, go in there." She then says that she hasn't actually seen anyone, but that she can hear them taking things from her condo.
Anyone else in immediate danger?
I believe so.
Okay, are you able to get yourself to safety?
I just want to answer that one.
When asked whether she was in any danger, she says that she believes she is, and that she's in the back bedroom of the property with no means to get herself to safety. The dispatcher then asks how the intruder got into her house, and she states that there's only one door into the condo, after which she once again yells for them to get out of her house. She's then asked if anyone else is in the building, and she states that she believes her roommate is also there. She says she thinks the intruders are in the condo's front room, and she can then be heard yelling, "Shut up." A few moments later, she states that she thinks the intruders have left, and that she's leaving the room to see if anything has been stolen. At this point, she can be heard talking to her roommate, who tells her that the front door is still locked, and that it would be impossible for anyone to get inside. She also adds that she heard people talking outside of her bedroom window that night before, and she believes that they were canvassing the condo to break in later. When her roommate asks her how anyone could get in while the door is locked, Kaylin replies that she can't explain it, but adds that she heard two people talking inside the condo. Later that day, Kaylin would mysteriously disappear, and when surveillance footage from outside of her condo was checked, the case got even more confusing. The footage shows Kaylin outside her condo as she takes her dog for a walk. But what investigators found strange was the fact that she was walking around during a rainstorm with no shoes on. At one point, she walks into view of the camera with her dog following close behind. What she does next has divided people on what actually is going on in the footage. Some people believe she starts having a conversation, either with someone off camera or someone who isn't actually there. Those who believe she's talking to a non-existent person claims that this indicates that she was delusional and that she was seeing things that weren't actually there. But most people think she stopped to talk to her dog, who had stopped following her for a few moments, and that there was nothing untoward to be seen in the footage. Judging by the hand gestures that she makes in the footage, it seems likely that the latter is indeed the case, since she seems to be gesturing directly at the dog and looking in its direction while talking. She can then be seen walking back in the direction of her condo before moving out of sight of the camera. A while later, she's seen running into the street from the direction of her condo, still wearing no shoes, glancing behind her as she makes her way between the two cars that are parked in the parking lot, nothing more than a misconception. After she disappeared, Kaylin's condo was searched, and it was found that she left her purse, cell phone, and her dog behind. Her family then organized a search of the area, and more than $8,000 was raised to aid in their search efforts, but no sign of Kaylin was ever found. Then, on the 1st of December, workers who were busy inspecting a pipeline in the nearby Jordan River came across a set of remains, and they immediately informed the police. When they arrived at the scene, it was quickly ascertained that it was Kaylin, who was found, and her family was informed of the discovery. But the case didn't get any clearer from here. Since Kaylin had been in the water for an extended period of time, the cause of her passing could not be determined, giving rise to even more theories as to how she ended up where she was found. Some people believe that she may have been outside when a flash flood occurred, and that she was caught up in the rushing water, ultimately drowning and ending up in the river where her body was eventually discovered. There's also a theory that she was picked up in a car by someone she knew, and that this person is responsible for her death. But there's no proof whatsoever that this is the case, and it remains just a theory. The difficulty with Kaylin's case is that there's no indication whether she was a victim of foul play, whether or not the weather had a hand in her passing, or whether her state of mind led to her death. There are still very few answers in her case, and it's doubtful that there will ever be any further developments since it occurred almost a decade ago, and the case has since been closed, leaving many questions unanswered. Usually, when a robbery is carried out, the culprits do their best to keep their faces hidden from CCTV security cameras, either by wearing masks, bulky clothing, and hoods over their heads, or by completely covering their faces with the use of a helmet, for example. But some robbers seem to care less about being identified by the authorities, as they carry out brazen robberies, seemingly without a care in the world. But more often than not, this leads to their downfall when they're recognized by members of the public or investigating officers. This seems to be the case when a well-known jewelry store in the Diamond District in New York was robbed by 3 men, who, while well-dressed, did little to keep their identities a secret, and by the time they left the store, they'd collected a haul of $4 million worth of jewelry. The store in question is called Aviani & Co., and it's well known amongst famous rappers and gangsters who have custom items made to fit their particular style. Most of the items on sale here are jewel-encrusted, and the store features some unique pieces, including skull shapes, scorpions, and dragons, to name but a few. But on the 25th of August, 2019, the store had many of its pieces carried away by 3 men, one of whom was pretending to be a customer who was interested in buying one of the pieces on display, and the entire incident was captured by the store's CCTV system. In the footage, the 3 men can be seen entering the store just after noon, after being buzzed in by one of the store's employees. It isn't surprising that they were let in, since they were well dressed and seemed to fit the style of the store's usual customers. The first man was dressed in a neat suit and a fedora hat, and he had long dreadlocks, though investigators believe that this was merely an ill-conceived disguise, since his face is clearly visible to the camera, and the wig doesn't help very much at all. The second robber had a red, white, and black bandana tied around his head, and he was wearing a dark-colored top and what looked like jeans. The third man had a bucket hat on his head, along with a gray and black top and light gray pants. All 3 of the robbers had short beards and seemed confident that their haul would be successful. After entering the store, one of the robbers claimed that he was interested in buying a ring, and he was accompanied by one of the store's employees to a back room where he was shown some of the options that were available. This is when one of his accomplices, the man in the bucket hat, jumped into action by pulling out a firearm and announcing that this was a robbery. His remaining companion then also produced a firearm, and together they took the rest of the store's employees into the back room, where they proceeded to tie them up with cable ties and duct tape. While this was happening, and before the employees were led to the back, the man in the suit could be seen sitting in the back room with the man who was showing him the rings. He then produced his own firearm and pointed it at the man, who was then told to lie on the floor, and he instantly complied, which is always a good idea. The employees were then told to lie on the floor, and the 3 men started collecting whatever they could get their hands on, albeit in a very disorderly fashion. One of the employees would later tell investigators that the robbery didn't seem to be planned very well, as 2 of the culprits kept yelling different orders, with one man at one point yelling, "Get their phones," referring to the store employees, while the other was yelling, "Open the showcase." Investigators later revealed that the robbers got away with very expensive watches and other irreplaceable items, and they would likely fetch a pretty penny when sold by the robbers later on. Strangely, the 3 men didn't seem to have a getaway vehicle, as is customary with this type of robbery, but instead they ran out of the shop and immediately started attempting to hail a taxi cab. The staff members who had been tied up kept an eye on the store's security monitors to make sure that the robbers were out of the store before they used pens to break through the duct tape, and then they contacted 911 to report what had happened. They told investigators that the robbers kept one of their wallets, and they were told that if they did anything stupid, they would be messed up. When investigators arrived, they scrutinized the store's security footage and started questioning the store's employees while it was closed the following day. One fellow Diamond District shop owner, who's been doing business in the area for a long time, stated that he didn't understand why Aviani & Co. opened on the day that they were robbed, since it was a Sunday when the area is very quiet, and it would have been very easy for the robbers to make their escape. Thanks to the robbers' carelessness with their disguises though, one man, 27-year-old Pedro Davila, was tracked down and taken into custody, while another 39-year-old Jayshawn Sutton was apprehended a short while later. Before he was apprehended though, investigators raided his girlfriend's home, Shalonda Washington, hoping that he would be there or know where he was. When they arrived at the apartment though, they learned that she wasn't there and had left 3 children alone and unsupervised. She was eventually tracked down, and when a search was performed, one of the stolen diamonds, which is worth $7,500, was found in her purse. The diamond was identified by the store's owner and placed back where it belongs. Washington was charged with larceny and risking injury to a child, but she was released after posting a $7,500 bond. As for the 2 robbers who were arrested, they were charged with robbery and brandishing a firearm. Davila and Sutton were ordered to repay a total of $3,372,154.92, and prosecutors requested that they both received a maximum sentence for their crime, which would be 14 years behind bars. The 3rd robber, whose name has not been made public, has still not been tracked down, but it's likely that he will eventually be found and also arrested. Investigators in Houston, Texas were able to close the case of the murder of a couple thanks to the security footage captured at their gated community, when someone who knew the culprits came forward to report that they recognized them. The couple, Bao and Jenny Lam, both of whom were 61 years old, had an adult son, Richard, who stopped by their home for a visit on the 13th of January, 2018. But when he knocked on the door, he got no answer, and he became concerned that something was wrong. He knew that his parents had been visiting his sister on the 11th, and that they left her home at about 8:15 p.m. before driving back to the gated community in Spring where they lived, and so he found it strange that they wouldn't be home. He decided to phone the police and asked that they perform a welfare check to make sure they weren't inside their house, since he hadn't heard a word from them for 2 days. When investigators arrived, they confirmed that the building was locked up, and when they looked in through the windows, it became apparent that something untoward had happened, since the house was in complete disarray. They spotted several of the couple's possessions lying on the floor, and noted that the drawers as well as cabinets had been left open. With no other option, they decided to force their way in, and that's when they made a grim discovery. Bao and Jenny were found deceased with their hands and feet bound. Their lives had been ended with a firearm before the house was ransacked, and several items were noted to be missing from the house, including the couple's firearms and their car, a 2016 Porsche Panamera. When security footage from the gated community was checked, investigators noticed a car, which they believed to be a black Lincoln Navigator, arriving at the couple's home at 8:20 p.m., and the 3 men can be seen getting out. 2 of the men then started making their way towards the house, but as they walked away from their car, a set of security lights switches off, and one of the men can be seen awkwardly navigating his way up the driveway, unable to see properly. In the footage, that same man is wearing khaki-colored pants and a black long-sleeved top, with what looks like a balaclava on his head. His accomplice, a slightly shorter man, is wearing all black, and as the 2 approach the house, the second man can be seen checking his phone. The 3rd man is seen in the footage wearing a tall, multicolored beanie, along with a hooded sweatshirt and what looks like tracksuit pants. This footage was quickly released to the public in hopes that someone would recognize one of the men and that they could be apprehended before carrying out another heinous crime. Investigators stated that they found further surveillance footage showing the 3 men leaving in Lam's Porsche at around 2:30 a.m., more than 6 hours after the robbers arrived. But the robbers weren't done yet. They returned in the couple's car later on that same morning and remained there until 6:30 a.m., after which 2 men got into the Porsche and drove away, following their accomplice who was driving the Navigator. In surveillance footage from the next 2 days, between the 11th and the 13th, the Porsche is seen returning to the area several times, proving how confident the 3 men were that they would get away with their crime. After the CCTV footage was released to the public, a witness came forward to report that they recognized the men carrying out the crime and provided investigators with their names, but they still had to be located. This didn't take long though, as several witnesses from a different area reported seeing the black Navigator leave an apartment that's located at 13035 Windfern, close to Jersey Village. Later that same night, The same men were seen returning to the same address, only this time they were driving a Porsche, and as soon as they arrived, they started unloading items and carrying them into the apartment. Now that they had an address, investigators acquired a search warrant, and it was found that the apartment belonged to 21-year-old Akil Ricardo Kendrick, who was one of the men seen in the security footage. A search was immediately carried out, and several of Lam's possessions were found inside, proving beyond a doubt that Kendrick was one of the men responsible for their untimely passing. Kendrick was taken into custody, and during his interrogation, he quickly pointed a finger at the other two men, one of which was his brother, 23-year-old Kari Ty Kendrick. He also revealed the identity of the third man, Eric Alfredo Peralta. All three men were charged with ending the couple's lives, and they were taken to the Harris County Jail. It would then come to light that the three men were also responsible for another robbery that occurred 2 days before the Lams were killed. In that incident, which took place on Tomball, a homeowner was attacked in his house and tied up, after which his house was ransacked and robbed of about 20 Louis Vuitton purses and a number of firearms. It's believed that the men were also responsible for several other violent crimes that occurred in Texas at around the same time as the other two robberies. The two Kendrick brothers each received a bond of $350,000, but they were unable to pay it and had no choice but to remain in prison until their sentencing date. Peralta, though, was able to pay his bond, and upon his release, he was ordered into 24-hour house arrest, which would be monitored via a GPS tracking device. Richard, the couple's son, was outraged at this decision, as he felt all three of the murderers should remain behind bars until they were sentenced, since he was able to see his family while Richard would never see his parents again. But this did nothing to change the three men's fates, as all three were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison without the possibility of parole. One would think that when a criminal is about to carry out a crime in an area where they know there will be security cameras, they would do their utmost to keep their identity a secret since they don't want to be caught. But some criminals seem to think that they'll get away with any crime they commit, no matter how serious it is, as is evidenced by CCTV security footage of a kidnapping that took place in Arlington, Texas in 2015. At around 3:40 a.m. on the 14th of January of that year, a 911 dispatcher received a call from a 21-year-old woman named Kristen Gala, who stated that she'd been kidnapped and was lucky to have escaped her ordeal with her life, adding that she was currently in Euless. She added that the incident occurred in the 2000 block of North Collins, where a man approached her car at 1:45 a.m. while she was withdrawing money from a Wells Fargo drive-through ATM after she finished her shift at work. She added that she initially thought the man was going to ask her for money, but as he reached the car, he produced a firearm and told her to hand over the money she'd withdrawn and to get out of the driver's seat after she popped open the car's trunk as instructed. Kristen stated that she'd used the ATM in the past and was always able to see when someone was walking by since the area is well lit, but on this occasion, she didn't see the man until he was right next to her. When she realized that he was robbing her, she made a mental note to remember as many of his features and his clothing as possible, since she would have to relay that information to police officers later. The man then told her to lie down in the trunk, after which he closed it, got into the driver's seat, and drove away. As the man drove away, she could hardly believe that she found herself in this dangerous situation, and she feared that he would end her life at some point. The man then drove to several other locations where Kristen was let out of the trunk and forced to withdraw more money from her account. He would then force her back into the trunk each time before driving to the next location. Eventually, the man must have decided that he had enough stolen money from her, as he stopped the car in Euless and simply walked away, leaving Kristen still locked inside the trunk, and eventually she realized that she could attempt an escape. She managed to make her way out of the trunk, and she ran to a nearby Quick Trip convenience store, where she called 911 to report what had happened. Luckily, she managed to make it through the ordeal without being harmed, but she's since stated that she's now quite nervous when driving, and she's constantly looking around when she stops at a red light or a stop sign, fearing that a similar incident might happen again. She's also been unable to place any items in her trunk since she was kidnapped, and instead resorts to placing her belongings in the car's back seat, since the trunk makes her feel very uneasy. When police officers started their investigation, They accompanied Kristen to the spot where she believed she was able to escape from the trunk, but when they arrived there, her car was nowhere to be seen. It would later be found back in Arlington, but it isn't known whether it was driven there by her kidnapper after he returned to the vehicle, or by someone else who found the car unattended. Investigators then decided to check CCTV footage from the drive-thru ATM, and they were shocked to see how brazen the kidnapper was while carrying out his crime, since he seemed to have very little concern that he might be recognized. The footage shows Kristen arriving at the ATM in her black car, and she proceeds to place her bank card in the machine while still seated in her vehicle. She seems to have completed her transaction and is in the process of putting her bank card and cash away when the kidnapper can be seen walking into view from behind her car. He's wearing a gray sweatshirt, dark-colored pants, white shoes, and a white and gray beanie. And as he walks around the ATM towards Kristen's car, he has what looks like a cell phone in his hand. But as he reaches the car, he pulls out a firearm and leans into the car's window, instructing Kristen to get out and open the trunk, which she then does. Inexplicably, the kidnapper then walks back around the back of the ATM, leaving Kristen standing by the side of her car, and many commenters who saw the footage state that this would have been the perfect time for her to run to safety. But since the man had a weapon, and she was terrified that he would use it, she decided it would be better to comply with his demands. The man then opens the trunk and Kristen can be seen getting in, after which he closes it and quickly makes his way to the driver's side before getting in. But as he does so, he looks directly at the CCTV camera that's situated in front of the car, giving investigators an incredibly clear image of his face, which would prove to be his undoing. Strangely, he makes sure to keep his sleeves over his hands to ensure that he doesn't leave behind any fingerprints. But since his face is clearly visible in the footage, this did little to hide his identity. He can then be seen putting the car in gear and driving off, with Kristen locked in the trunk. It was clear to investigators that this wasn't a planned crime, but rather one of opportunity, and it's likely the man was walking past the ATM at just the right time to carry out the robbery and kidnapping. The surveillance footage was released to the public, and soon investigators received several tips from people who recognized the man as 18-year-old Donald Moses. Arlington police and the U.S. Marshal Service worked together to track Moses down, and he was eventually taken into custody in February. Investigators later stated that they managed to talk to Moses' mother while she was serving time in the Dallas County Jail, and she was able to confirm that it was him in the footage. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping and aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. Not much information is available on the sentence that was handed down, but given that both the charges brought against Moses are felonies, it'll likely be a long time before he sees the outside of a prison again. During most bank robberies, the culprit will approach a bank teller and either hand them a note informing them that they're robbing the bank, or they'll demand that the teller hand over any cash that they have before fleeing the scene. But one robber in Canada seems to have his own way of doing things, as he tends to demand a specific amount of money each time that he robs a bank, which is strange since he almost certainly would have gotten away with more than he asked for. In January of 2016, police in Toronto asked for the public's help in identifying 3 bank robbers who were wanted in connection with a string of robberies that were carried out in 2015. The men had been given monikers by police officers according to each of their appearances. The first was called Tunnel Rat, the second Bubbles, and the third Whiskers, the first of whom was caught on one of the bank's security cameras while he was carrying out one of the robberies. Together, the 3 men carried out as many as 8 bank robberies between the 6th of January and the 11th of March 2015, with 4 of those being carried out along the Danforth subway line, and only Tunnel Rat was captured on security footage. In the footage that was obtained from the bank, the man can be seen standing at one of the teller counters, wearing a black baseball cap, a gray hooded sweatshirt, the hood of which has been pulled over the cap, and gray gloves as well as a scarf. He was also captured in footage outside another bank, and here he can be seen wearing a light-colored baseball cap, a large black windbreaker jacket with a hood which is again pulled up over the hat, light-colored pants, a scarf, and what looks like black shoes. In this footage, he seems to be wearing sunglasses, but thanks to the shadow being cast by his hat, this is only speculation. At each of the robberies, the man threatened the teller and stated that he was armed, which may or may not have been the case, since he was never seen producing a firearm. Whatever the case may be, the threat of having a firearm pointed at someone is enough to make them comply during a robbery. and it'll always be assumed that the robber is indeed armed. After his image was made available to the public, the Canadian Bankers Association stated that they would be offering a reward of up to $10,000 to anyone who came forward with information leading to his identification and arrest. Investigators stated that Tunnel Rat was Caucasian, around 30 years old, and he had dark hair, standing around 6 feet tall and 170 pounds. It was also noted that when he had completed each of the 4 subway-adjacent robberies, he would quickly exit the bank and make his way to the subway system, where he would quickly disappear among the crowd and hence became known as the Tunnel Rat Bandit. The second man, who'd been named Bubbles, was caught on security camera when he was carrying out a robbery at a bank on Dundas Street and Bay Street in March of the same year. He also walked up to one of the tellers and handed him a note, but he didn't ask for a specific amount, as was the case in the first robberies. When the teller hesitated, he repeated his demands verbally and stated that if they didn't comply with his demands, he would discharge the weapon, and so the teller handed him an undisclosed amount of cash from the drawer. He then quickly fled from the bank and made a clean getaway. He was described as African American, unshaven, and in his 30s. In a still image from the security footage, he can be seen wearing a thick gray jacket, a scarf, and a gray hat. He's also wearing plastic-rimmed glasses and is believed to be around 5'7" tall. The third robber, who was named Whiskers, entered a bank in DuPont Street and Symington Avenue on the 7th of May, where he proceeded to carry out a very similar robbery. He also approached one of the bank tellers with a handwritten note, which demanded they hand over the cash they had. He also gestured to the teller that he had a firearm on him, and the teller quickly complied, handing over an amount of money that's not been made public. After fleeing the building, he jumped in an awaiting taxi cab and made his getaway. It's believed that the same man is responsible for robbing another bank in the Steeles Avenue West area and Bathurst area, since the modus operandi was pretty much exactly the same during that incident. Whiskers was described as Caucasian and younger than the other 2 robbers, as he seemed to be in his 20s. He has a slim build and stands around 5'8" tall, and in the still image from the security footage, he's wearing a gray beanie, a scarf, sunglasses, and a dark-colored jacket. He was given his moniker thanks to his mustache and beard, which were neatly trimmed. But for the next year, investigators had no luck in tracking any of the 3 men down, despite releasing the security footage and still images from each of the robberies. At the same time, they also announced that they were looking for 2 more robbers who'd been named the Envelope Bandit and Construction Bandit, respectively. Construction Bandit carried out his robbery while wearing an item of clothing similar to a construction high-visibility vest, but investigators believed that this was merely a disguise and made sure to point out that he was likely not a construction worker. He was estimated to be in his mid to late 40s, with a heavy build and standing around 6 feet tall. A $10,000 reward was also announced to anyone who supplied investigators with information leading to his capture. The Envelope Bandit was so named since he would approach the teller wearing a disguise and hand them a large envelope containing a note that stated that he was armed and that they should hand over the money. His last robbery was committed in March of 2016, and he's still not been identified. He was described as having a slight build with a thin mustache, standing around 5'7" tall, and he's believed to be in his 30s. The $10,000 reward was also offered for information leading to his whereabouts and conviction. As for the Tunnel Rat Bandit, investigators received a number of leads from people who believed they recognized him from the security footage, and these turned out to be very helpful, with a police spokesperson stating that several people would be receiving monetary rewards for their efforts. He was eventually identified as 27-year-old Ryan Patrick Flaherty, and was discovered that he'd made his way to Western Canada in an effort to evade capture. But when it became apparent that the law was closing in on his location, he decided it would be better to hand himself over, which he did on the 18th of July, 2016. Flaherty was arrested and charged with 9 counts of robbery and 9 counts of wearing a disguise. Unfortunately, there's no information available on the amount of prison time that he was sentenced to, but given that he was arrested for carrying out so many robberies, he'll certainly be spending a long time in prison. The other 4 robbers that were being sought have never been arrested, and investigators have stated that these cases have now gone cold, but hold out hope that a member of the public will come forward with new information that'll help them identify and prosecute the culprits. It's often the case that when a criminal is caught, their internet search history only further proves their guilt, which was the case when 59-year-old architect Rex Hauerman, a suspected serial killer, was taken into custody in June of 2023. It all began on the 1st of May 2010, when a 24-year-old street worker named Shannon Gilbert made a 911 call in which she stated she feared for her life after meeting a client who contacted her via Craigslist. During the call, Shannon can be heard saying, "There's someone after me. These people are trying to kill me." To which the operator replied, "Where are you, Shannon?" But the line then went dead, and Shannon wasn't heard from again. When she was never seen by her friends and family after this, they reported her missing. Witnesses came forward to say that Shannon had knocked on their doors in Oak Beach, Long Island, to ask for assistance, but she then ran away, clearly scared and confused. A search was organized, and it would only add to investigators' worries, as 4 other women were found deceased between Cedar Beach and Gilgo Beach, each of whom had been placed in a burlap sack. The 4 women were eventually identified as Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, all of whom were known to be street workers, but Shannon remained missing. The 4 women who were found had been missing for years by this point, and rumors started to swirl that a serial killer may be at work in the Long Island area. But investigators were quick to dismiss these claims. 4 months later, the number of deceased people had grown to 10, most of whom were located in the Jones Beach State Park area. But despite so many sites being uncovered, there was no evidence to indicate who the culprit was. In December of 2011, Shannon's family was devastated when they received news that she'd been found deceased by police divers in a stretch of marshy land close to Oak Beach, but it could not be determined whether her life had been ended by the same person, though it was now likely that investigators were indeed dealing with a serial killer. The case would go cold until 2020, when investigators decided to release a photo of a black leather belt that was found at one of the sites, noting that it had a set of initials on it, either HM or WH. They also stated that they believed the belt was left at one of the sites by the culprit, and that it likely didn't belong to any of the victims. In February of 2022, a new interagency task force was created with the sole purpose of solving the killings, and the FBI was asked to assist. One of the first tasks that were completed during this investigation was to speak to one of the missing women, Amber Lynn Costello's boss, who stated that he last saw her on the 2nd of September 2010 in West Babylon. He admitted that on the previous evening, he and Amber had hatched a plan whereby a client was lured to her house only to be chased away by her boss, who was posing as her boyfriend, and that they hoped to scam the man out of money. The man left but contacted Amber again the next day, saying that he wanted to meet up somewhere where her boyfriend wouldn't bother them. She agreed and set out to meet him, never to be seen again. Her boss stated that the man was driving a green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche and that he didn't know his name, but that there was a good chance that he was responsible for ending her life. This was the first solid lead that investigators could follow up on, and in doing so, they found that a vehicle matching that description was being driven by Rex Hauerman at the time that Amber went missing. When they looked into the possibility that Hauerman might be the man they were looking for, they found that he also matched the descriptions given by other witnesses, who described him as ogre-like, in his 40s, and standing around 6 foot 5 inches tall. Hauerman was immediately considered the main suspect in the case, and the investigation only gained traction from then on out. It was known that the killer was in the habit of using burner phones, since they could easily be discarded after the crimes were committed, but Hauerman wasn't careful enough while he had them in his possession. It was found that these phones were always in the vicinity of Hauerman's everyday cell phone, most notably near towers that are situated near his Manhattan office, and his house, which is in Massapequa Park. When these records were scrutinized, it was found that the phones were also in the locations where the victims disappeared or lost their lives at the times when they went missing. In fact, there was not one instance where one of these phones wasn't in one of these locations, and it was now all but certain that this was the man that they'd been looking for more than 12 years. Strangely, it was also found that 2 of the victims' phones last pinged off the same towers as Hauerman's after the crimes had been committed, and it was then discovered that he'd kept their phones in order to contact their families, so that he could boast about the crimes he had committed. It was also discovered that these calls were likely made while he was in his office, since the phones pinged off a nearby tower at the times that the calls were placed, But his disturbing behavior didn't end there. It was later discovered that Howerman had been keeping a close eye on the investigation into the murders, and on several occasions he made internet searches for terms such as Long Island serial killer phone call, and why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer. When he learned that a new task force had been created to search for him, he also managed to keep tabs on the investigation by conducting internet searches, but by now, investigators were on his trail and didn't release much information on what they had discovered. And in one piece of CCTV footage, they can be seen following him without his knowledge. When strands of hair found at 3 of the crime scenes were found to belong to Howerman's wife, it seemed that there may be a twist in the case's tale. But it was quickly determined that she'd been out of town at the time that these crimes were committed, and it was likely that the hairs were merely accidentally transferred via Howerman's clothing. But they also found a strand of hair belonging to a male at one of the sites, and since he was under constant surveillance, his DNA was extracted from a pizza box that he'd been seen throwing into a trash can, and the 2 samples were found to be an exact match. Howerman was finally arrested on the 13th of July, 2023, and he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder for ending the lives of Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman, and Melissa Bartholomew. He's pleaded not guilty to all of the charges and is currently being held in a correctional facility in Suffolk County, where he'll remain until his trial. When someone who's serving in the military goes missing, it's usually because they've been captured by the enemy or because they lost their life during a battle. But in the disappearance of 24-year-old missing infantry Marine Matthew Kraft, this wasn't the case, as he was on deployment leave when he went missing. Matthew, who served as a platoon leader with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines at Camp Pendleton in California, decided to go on a 10-day hiking and skiing trip, which started on the 24th of February 2019. He planned to start his journey in the Inyo Forest's Kearsarge Pass Trail, and he told his family and his superiors at the Marine Corps that he would be returning to Bridgeport on the 4th or 5th of March. But when he failed to keep this timeline, his family started to become concerned. His father contacted the Mono County Sheriff's Office to file a missing person report, and a search effort was quickly organized in hopes that he would be found before the cold conditions in the area became even worse, since a winter storm was expected to sweep through the area in the days that followed. The first few days of searching didn't yield any results, as none of Matthew's equipment, clothing, or personal items were found. But then a rescue team from Inyo Search and Rescue discovered his rental car close to Lower Grays Meadows, which is located near Independence, but there was no sign of Matthew or any indication as to which direction he walked after leaving the car. At one point, thermal imaging cameras were used to look for Matthew's heat signature, and one was found, giving searchers hope that he was still alive. But when it was investigated further, it was found to belong to a hibernating bear. As the search continued, teams found debris from an avalanche that took place in the area, but it could not be determined whether Matthew had been caught in it, since there was just too much snow to search through. Local hikers stated that no one should have gone into the mountains at that time of year, since it was exceedingly dangerous. But Matthew had training as a winter survivalist and likely believed that he would be able to handle the harsh conditions. Search teams also found the going very tough and at times nearly impossible to traverse, and so a snowcat was used to tow them to the top of the Onion Valley parking area, and it was determined that the avalanche took place at about 8,000 feet. This wasn't the only evidence found of avalanches, as it was determined that a series of smaller ones had also taken place in the area. There was a real concern that searchers might get trapped in another avalanche, and hence searches were then restricted to the air. When Matthew's cell phone records were checked, it was found to have last been used near Independence, but that was the last time that it was active, suggesting that it was either turned off or didn't have any signal after that. When all subsequent efforts to find Matthew were unsuccessful, the search was called off, and it was believed that he would be found once the snow melted, but this wasn't the case, and he remains missing to this day. Anyone who has information on Matthew's disappearance is urged to contact either the Inyo County Sheriff's Office at 760-878-0383, selecting option 4, the Mono County Sheriff's Office at 760-932-7549, selecting option 7, or the Fresno County Sheriff's Office at 559-600-8400. On the 8th of December 1942, an event took place at an airfield in China, a year and 1 day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it's still spoken about today, though many people are skeptical whether it really took place. On that day, radar systems at the airfield picked up something that no one was expecting. A plane was headed directly for the base from the direction of Formosa in Taiwan, and this set everyone on edge as they feared that the plane could be part of an aerial assault. Pilots Robert Lee Scott and Johnny Hampshire were ordered to scramble their planes, both P-40s, to the area to investigate, and a short while after taking off, they spotted something in the sky in the distance. What looked like a mere dot in the sky at first eventually grew larger as they approached, and they soon realized this was no ordinary plane that was approaching, but a P-40 that had strange American markings that had not been used for close to 12 months. They were immediately wary, thinking this might be a plane that had been disguised to trick them into letting their guard down, and try as they may, they could get no response from the pilot over the radios. They knew that they had to figure out who the plane was being piloted by, and so they flew closer while firing warning shots over the plane's wing. But the plane didn't deviate from its course. There was still no radio contact, and it all started to feel just a little too peculiar. The two pilots decided that they had to get as close as possible to the strange plane, and when they did so, they were shocked to discover that it was riddled with bullet holes. Parts of its wing were missing, as were parts of its landing gear. They realized that something strange was going on, since the plane should not have been able to get up off the ground, let alone fly a substantial distance. But when they finally caught sight of the pilot, they were even more taken aback. The plane's canopy was almost non-existent. The pilot was slumped over and unmoving, and it seemed as if the plane was flying itself, though they both wondered how it was even remaining in one piece with all the damage that it had sustained. They continued to try to get the pilot's attention, but to no avail. The plane's engine then started sputtering as it was running out of fuel, and it started losing altitude. Some sources state that as the plane started to spiral out of control, the pilot looked up with a smile on his face and gave Scott and Hampshire a thumbs up, while others state that he remained motionless. But whatever the case may be, there was no chance of saving him or his plane, as he was now on a crash course with the ground. The pair returned to the airfield, but decided to search for the plane the following morning so that the pilot could be identified. When they reached the spot where the plane went down, they observed scorch marks on the ground and pieces of the fallen plane scattered around. They landed their planes and started searching through the debris, but could find no trace of the fallen pilot. All that was found were the remnants of a diary, and from this they learned that the plane took off from Mindanao, an island in the Philippines that's located about 1,300 miles from the crash site. Many people believe that the plane crashed long before the incident, and that the two pilots encountered a ghost plane, while others believe the pilot managed to survive after his plane was shot down, and finally met his end just short of the airfield. But this remains speculation, and the mystery of the P-40 ghost plane has never been solved. The attack on Pearl Harbor that took place on the 7th of December 1941 is one of the most talked about military events in modern history, since it resulted in the US declaring war upon Japan and effectively entering the Second World War. While the events of that day have been extensively studied, there are a few events connected to it that still baffle experts. One of these being a mysterious advertisement that appeared in the New Yorker magazine on the 22nd of November, 2 weeks before the attack was carried out. The ad started with the word "warning" placed above a set of dice, one black and one white, though these were no ordinary dice, as they contained the numbers 12, 24, and the letters XX. The main advert appeared on page 86 of the magazine, and it showed a group of people in an underground bunker playing the dice game while an air raid is being carried out above their heads. It also contained the text, "We hope you'll never have to spend a long winter's night in an air raid shelter, but we were just thinking, it's only common sense to be prepared." It suggested that families plan ahead by creating a list of items that they'll need while sheltering in a bunker, and added that the deadly double game would be an excellent addition. Considering that the attack occurred on the 7th day of the 12th month, the same numbers that were shown on the dice, many people suspected that the ad was supposed to serve as a warning, and an investigation was launched to ascertain who placed it, since they may have had foreknowledge of the attack. A Navy transport pilot named Joseph Bell got word of the strange ad from an intelligence officer who was assigned to the investigation, but who'd made no progress in identifying the person responsible for it. All he knew was that someone had brought the ad to the New Yorker's office in person, and that they paid cash for it to be published. The clerk who spoke to that person couldn't remember what they looked like, and strangely, no evidence could be found that the game or the company, Monarch Publishing, who offered it for sale, ever existed. After the war had ended, Bell decided to do a little digging of his own, and he managed to find a copy of the magazine in a library. He paged through it and found the ad in question, noting that it did look very suspicious. But quite unbelievably, it would later come to light that the similarities between it and the attack on Pearl Harbor were nothing more than an inexplicable coincidence, and that it hadn't been a warning at all. The person responsible for the ad has never been identified, and it'll likely never be known who they were. This has resulted in many people still believing that it did have something to do with the attack, and that the whole event had been covered up either by the military or the FBI. Pete Ellis joined the US military in 1900, and just 2 years later, he'd reached the rank of second lieutenant. He would spend a few more years in the service, during which he would rise in rank and command soldiers in the Pacific Fleet, China, Japan, and Washington. He would eventually reach the rank of 12th Commandant of the Marine Corps, and here he started working as an intelligence officer during World War I. When the war was over, he received a Distinguished Service Medal, the Navy Cross, and French Legion d'Honneur Medal, and he decided to remain in the military. Ellis was said to be steadfast in his work, sometimes getting little to no sleep while working on the projects that he'd been given, and he soon gained a reputation for being an excellent intelligence officer. At one point, he was sent to areas that were being occupied by Japan, including the Marshall and Caroline Islands. He posed as an import executive while traveling through Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines, and eventually made it to the islands to gather intelligence, though he was being followed by Japanese soldiers who suspected that he was gathering information. It was when he reached Palau that he met his end. He was in ill health thanks to a severe drinking problem, and when the Japanese military found out that he'd refused to stop consuming alcohol, they sent him 2 bottles of whiskey, which he then drank and passed away. But before all this happened, he'd been stationed in the Marine headquarters in Washington, where he worked on warplanes, and he created a $30,000 word report called Advanced Base War Operations in Micronesia, which outlined events that would come true during World War II. Ellis predicted that the US would go to war against Japan, and that Japan would be the first to attack. He then theorized that the resulting skirmishes would take place on certain islands, and that they would be initiated via amphibious US assaults, and that these islands would then become US bases for the rest of the war. This very document was used as a blueprint in the Second World War after the attack on Pearl Harbor, which Ellis correctly predicted. The island hopping strategy used by the US forces in that war was a direct result of Ellis's work. He set his predictions out in 3 stages, the first being that Marines would land in the Marshall Islands. Secondly, they would make their way to the Carolines, modern-day Palau. And thirdly, he warned that the island of Guam would be vulnerable during the conflict. The document that Ellis created is seen by many as prophetic, since most of his predictions about future warfare came true. And while he had a less than stellar reputation as far as his behavior was concerned, he's considered by many today to be a visionary, since he foresaw the need for the US Navy to improve their amphibious teams, that up until then had been very disorganized. Though he would never know it, Ellis had a massive impact on the future of US warfare, and many experts are still baffled as to how he was able to predict what would happen 20 years after he passed away. We've all heard stories of twins who seem to feel each other's physical pain, even when they aren't together. But it's far less common for this to happen between 2 friends. But this is exactly what happened to a man named Joe O'Brien and his friend Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Sami Mubarak. The strange event occurred in January of 1991, when Sami was serving in the Kuwait Air Force as a jet pilot. At the time, Operation Desert Storm was in full effect, and Joe, who was back in the US, constantly thought of him and the dangers that he must have been experiencing. Then one night, Joe got a call from one of his and Sammy's mutual friends, a woman named Carrie, who then told him of the unfortunate news that their friend's plane had been shot down during an airstrike. Shocked at the news, he turned on his television to see if he could find more information, but he eventually went to bed none the wiser, wondering if Sammy was still alive, and if so, how he was doing. He eventually drifted off to sleep, but his rest wasn't peaceful, as he had a dream that he couldn't explain. In the dream, he found himself looking through his friend's eyes at a dark room that had a small window near the top of the wall. A nearly useless light hung above the window, allowing him to make out the maroon-colored tiles on the wall. He felt cold and started shivering, since he only had a thin green and white blanket for warmth. Suddenly, he became aware of an extreme pain in both of his wrists, after which he jarred awake, completely confused by the strange dream. He knew that he had dreamed of Sammy, but since he'd been shot down over the desert, he was certain that the dream was just a remnant of the concerns that he had for his friend. But he then realized that the same pain that he felt in his dream was still present in both of his wrists. He ran his hands and wrists under cold water, but the pain persisted, and for the next 5 days it wouldn't go away. Joe decided not to tell anyone about the dream, but he thought about it often while he waited for news on what had become of Sammy. He knew that he had been taken prisoner, but had no idea what condition he was in or if he was still alive. It would be a full month before he got news that Sammy was being released by his prisoners. Once that was done, Joe and Sammy spoke briefly over the phone, but it wouldn't be until 2 years later that they would see each other again. Sammy had been invited to Joe's for the holidays along with his sister, and during this time the two friends finally had the chance to talk about what had happened during the time that Sammy was captured. Joe spoke about the strange dream he had, describing the small window and the maroon-colored tiles that he saw, as well as the green and white blanket and the pain that he experienced in his wrists. He told him the story as an anecdote, but when he looked up, he realized that Sammy had an amazed expression on his face. He'd never told anyone of the ordeal that he went through, but upon hearing Joe's tale, he made an exception. He revealed that he was indeed kept in a dark room that had one window with a dim light hanging above it. The tiles in the room were the same color as they were in Joe's dream, and when he was captured, his hands were cuffed far too tightly, causing a lot of pain in his wrists. He even showed the scars that the cuffs had left on his wrist to Joe, who could hardly believe what he was hearing. He then added that the room was unbearably cold, and that the only thing he had to keep him warm was a green and white striped blanket, just as Joe had seen it in his dream. The two men were dumbfounded. They couldn't believe that Joe had seen exactly what was going on the other side of the planet, and to this day they're at a loss as to how this could happen. Sammy had never revealed any of the details to anyone after he was released, and yet Joe was incredibly accurate in his descriptions of the place where Sammy was kept. It's an inexplicable event that will likely never be explained, but what is certain is that there was a bond between these two friends that could not be broken. In 1873, the 100-foot flat-bottomed three-masted schooner named the Sabrina was launched for the first time from Whitstable in England. Thanks to the flat design of its hull, it was used to transport meat and cement across shallow water wharves in South America, and for the first 7 years of its life, this is what it was used for. But the ship was then retired and eventually made its way into the mercantile navy, and during the First World War, it was used to transport coal to France. It had completed this trip many times over, but on the 15th of September, 1917, it would set out from Falmouth in the UK for the last time. On that day, Captain J. Archibald Martin steered the Sabrina towards France with a hull full of coal, after being forced to abandon the trip 3 days earlier due to bad weather. Aboard with him were George Stewart, W.H. Beck, William Ferdinand, and Douglas Bourke, and Martin Faust. But at some point in the journey, something went wrong, and just 2 days later, reports were received in France that a ship had run aground, and the Sabrina was in trouble. A salvage and rescue crew was sent to the area, and as they approached, they realized that the ship was moored in just 6 feet of water, but remarkably had sustained very little damage, mostly thanks to its flat hull. They were expecting to be welcomed by the ship's crew, who must have had a harrowing experience, but as they reached the ship, they were surprised that no one had appeared on its deck. They boarded and found that none of the crew was present, though the galley fire was still burning. The table had been laid for the crew's next meal, and the cargo was still completely intact. They looked for signs that the crew had abandoned ship, but there was no reason for them to have done so. The Zabrina was then towed after the cargo was removed, and the crew was never seen or heard from again. While it seemed that they'd simply vanished into thin air, there are a few theories as to what may have happened on that fateful day. Some people think that the ship once again encountered bad weather, since gales and squalls had been reported by other ships in the area. But the ship's rigging was completely intact, suggesting that it hadn't run into much trouble as far as the weather was concerned. Others speculated that the crew had been washed overboard by a large wave, but this also seemed unlikely, since the ship would have sustained at least some damage if it was hit by a big enough wave to dislodge the crew. There's also the possibility that the ship was attacked by a German U-boat, and that the crew had been taken prisoner or jumped overboard to avoid capture. But since the captain's logbook was found on his deck, rather than being taken by German soldiers as is protocol, this also seems unlikely, and the fate of the men aboard the Zabrina will likely never be known. In 2013, a series of photos taken in 1916 during the First World War surfaced, and they contained images of two officers in their military uniforms. In the first image, one officer in a New Zealand uniform and a lemon squeezer hat smiles broadly at the camera while saluting. In the second, they're joined by a second officer who can be seen holding a pipe. In one image, they stand next to each other, while in another, the second officer is sitting on a bench with his pipe between his teeth. It is, however, the last photo in this sequence that has caused a lot of confusion among historians. The image shows the second officer in the company of a woman who's perched on his knee, and it was then discovered that she was the officer in the other photos. At first, neither of these people's identities was known, but after some research was done, it was discovered that the man in the photos was likely Captain Albert Arthur Chapman, who served in the 7th Southland Mounted Rifles. Looking closely at his uniform, historians realized that he must have known the woman in the photos well, since he once visited her while he was a first lieutenant, and again after he was promoted to captain. Strangely, the woman can be seen wearing a wedding ring, but Chapman would eventually return to New Zealand after the war, still unmarried, and hence it isn't known whether he had proposed to her, or if she was married to someone else, possibly a soldier who'd perished during his time in the military. What is known is that the building that can be seen in the background are those of the Via des Acacias, which is situated in Alençon, France, where the photos were found among 17 other glass photographic plates, but the woman's identity remains a mystery. One theory that's been put forward is that Chapman had indeed intended to marry the mystery woman, but that he never had the chance to since a flu epidemic broke out in France in 1918, the year after the last photo was taken, and she may have succumbed along with about 16% of Alençon's population. Chapman never married, and it's been speculated that he never got over the loss of the woman in the photos, though this remains mere speculation, as we have no proof that the two were ever involved in a romantic relationship, and for all we know, they may have just been friends. But it remains an intriguing mystery, as we'll likely never learn who this mystery woman was and what role she played in Chapman's life during and after the war. In 2013, staff at the University of Abertay in Dundee, Scotland, made an intriguing discovery when they were in the process of clearing out a cupboard in the building's psychology department. They happened upon a suitcase that looked as though it had seen better days, and when they opened it, it became apparent why it was in such rough shape. It dated all the way back to World War I and contained some very interesting items. Among these items were old photos, a diary, a signed photo of Queen Mary, and an autograph book that had been signed by German prisoners of war, who'd also written messages to the person whom the suitcase belonged to. At first, the suitcase's owner was a mystery, but after some research was done, she was identified as Nurse Margaret Mall, who served at Dartford War Hospital in Kent during the First World War. The diary revealed that she worked at the Shakespeare Hospital in Glasgow, and that she later trained as Queen's nurse in Greenock. Strangely, there are no records that show Margaret working or living in Abertay, and hence it's a mystery how her belongings ended up at the university. Thanks to her diary, we know that Margaret's brother lost his life during the war, and that this prompted her to also join the war effort. But she was disappointed to learn that she was being sent to Dartford, where her main duties would be to care for wounded German soldiers who had been taken prisoner. But it would seem that as time went by, she befriended some of these soldiers, as the messages left in her autograph book are full of gratitude for the care she provided them, with one soldier stating that he would remember her for the rest of his life. Another stated that he couldn't believe they were actually enemies, and he expressed his heartfelt appreciation for everything that she did for him while he was being kept prisoner far away from home. It's also known that she had an unpleasant experience with one soldier in her care, since a newspaper cutting contained her photo and the headline "Threatened by Prussian, I Tended" was also found in the suitcase. The contents of the suitcase were the only clues that researchers had to try and figure out exactly who Margaret was, and in an effort to learn more, an appeal was made to the public in Paisley Daily Express newspaper for anyone with more information to come forward. Before long, a family who's not been named came forward to reveal that they were descendants of Nurse Margaret's, but they declined to give any further information, and it isn't known why they decided to keep this information to themselves. The only additional information that was ever found was that Margaret lived at 5 Mackerel Street while growing up, and that she had attended East Public School in Paisley before starting her training as a nurse, which she completed at Mary Flats Hospital when she was 30 years old. She worked as a nurse until her retirement in 1969 when she was 82 years old, proving that she had a real passion for her chosen career. Not much is known about her life after her retirement, but she's been hailed as a true inspiration as she continued her work while struggling with the fact that she had to care for soldiers who supported the side that had ended her brother's life. A similar discovery to that of Nurse Margaret's suitcase was made at the University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada, when a series of sketches that were created by a soldier during World War I were found in the university's archives. Marcus Milwright, an art history professor at the university, stated that the sketches seemed to have been made by a British soldier, since he's known to have used a stationery containing the coat of arms of the Royal Regiment of Artillery. It's also known that the artist's initials were JM, and that he spent time serving in France as well as Belgium in the period between 1917 and 1918. Furthermore, he's known to have had a daughter named Adele M, since he dedicated one of his 2 sketchbooks to her, but his identity, as well as that of his daughter, remains a mystery. Milwright first became aware of the sketches while he was in the midst of planning a World War I exhibit at the university, and he was surprised at how professional many of the drawings were. While many of the drawings are hard to look at, since they depict some horrible things that the artist saw while he was serving in the military, some are more humorous and show officers slacking off, playing cards while soldiers were engaged in battle on the front lines. It then came to light that the collection of images was acquired by the university after it was either sold or donated to the school, possibly in 1960, but there are no such records showing who owned the images before they made their way there. Researchers were able to determine that the artist was still alive in 1920, since one of the sketches is dated to that year, and they're certain that he traveled through Belgium and France while serving in the military, since some of the sketches seem to show images from those areas. Other images found in the 2 volumes include the regimental crests of the Royal Horse and Royal Field Artillery units, but no one knows whether the artist was part of these regiments or whether he merely encountered them during the war. Professor Milwright has since identified at least 30 soldiers who had the same initials as the artist, JM, but narrowing it down from there has been almost impossible since so little information is known about him. He's eager to gather more information on the artist and has asked that members of the public who may know who JM was come forward, as the works of art can then be attributed to the correct person. For now, though, he and his colleagues are attempting to figure out which brigade this soldier served with, using vital clues from the sketches, and once they're able to do so, they may be able to identify him with certainty. One sketch that may be helpful in this regard shows the artist's personal belongings on a shelf, as well as the bunk that he slept in. It also contains sketches of photos that he kept, and a folder believed to belong to either a map maker or an artist. It should also be noted that he was in contact with soldiers, as well as high-ranking officers, while he created the sketches in the trenches, and that at that time, he was still serving as a junior officer. Researchers are also focusing their efforts on the artist's daughter, and they've started looking at census information in the hopes that they'll come across an Adele M, who was born during this time. But these efforts have been unsuccessful so far, and JM's identity remains an unsolved mystery. Since the end of World War II, people have speculated that German soldiers had hidden treasure troves in different areas of the world, and there are even dedicated treasure hunters who hope to unravel these mysteries, making a lot of money in the process. While many of these accounts have been found to be spurious, one book, known as the McKellis Diary, has been made public by the Freemasons, who secretly had it in their possession for decades, and it may just contain the locations of such a treasure. The diary was written by an SS officer called Waffenschutzstaffel, and it details the plans by German commander Heinrich Himmler to keep the treasures stolen in Europe hidden. These included pieces of art, artifacts, and 30 tons of gold, but until now their location was unknown. All in all, the diary lists as many as 11 sites where these treasures have been hidden, one of which is an abandoned well that's known to be at least 200 feet deep, and which is located under Hochberg Palace in Poland. The gold that's said to be buried here is thought to have been stolen from a destroyed bank vault at the Reichsbank in Poland, and could be worth millions, if not billions of dollars, though this is yet to be proven. This may soon be done though, since the diary also contains a map detailing the exact location of some of the treasure, which has been clearly marked with an X. While many people feel that the diary and its contents may just be a hoax, many others believe that it is indeed authentic, and that it's only a matter of time before these treasures are found and returned to their rightful owners. Poland's Ministry of Culture and National Heritage is still in the process of confirming whether the diary is authentic, which may take some time, but it is certain that it was authored during the Second World War. The diary further states once these treasures were lowered down into the well, any witnesses were quickly done away with and also lowered into the well, after which soldiers set off explosives to ensure that no one would find their cache. The diary remained in the hands of the Freemasons until 2019, and it's been suggested that its author was part of the secret society, but in 2019, it was handed over to the Silesian Bridge Foundation in Poland as an apology for World War II. There's been speculation that these may not be the only treasures hidden in the area, since nearby caves in Lower Silesia form part of a network of caves where many people believe German soldiers hid many of their ill-gotten goods for later retrieval. After the war was over, it was discovered that a director of the Silesian Museum had gathered a massive treasure trove of his own, and he later revealed that he had hidden precious items in as many as 80 locations. It's known that this was a trait of German soldiers at the time, and hence many people have no doubt about the veracity of the newly revealed diary, and that it will soon reveal many of the items that were stolen during the conflict. For the time being, more research is being carried out on the diary and its author, and hopefully it won't be too long before we find out whether it's accurate or not. Brett Orme, a 52-year-old man from New Zealand, mysteriously disappeared on the 15th of August, and inexplicably one of the last things known about his movements before he vanished is that he took a selfie. Investigators handling Brett's case have labeled his disappearance as suspicious, as he had a phone call with his son 2 days after he was last seen while he was visiting a walking track in Queensland, and the two had made plans to meet up sometime in the near future. The last time that Brett was seen was in the Queensland neighborhood of Fitzgibbon as he left home in his white Nissan truck. He was wearing a high-visibility vest and also posted to Facebook before he left, but his social media accounts have seen no activity since, and his family found that strange as he's known to use Facebook several times a day. When CCTV cameras in the area were checked, investigators found footage of Brett's truck driving along Patrick's Road in Arana Hills just after noon on the 13th of August, but it isn't known where he was heading. On the 16th of August, Brett's truck was found at the Tinchitamba wetlands in Bald Hills. It was found to be locked and Brett was nowhere to be seen, so it was considered abandoned. His cell phone was found by someone walking along the Ironbark Gully walking track on that same day that his truck was found, though some sources state that there was a 3-day gap between these two events. Luckily, his phone was handed in to the police, and when it was checked, investigators found a selfie that he took along the same track at around 12:30 p.m. But they believe he was just enjoying the outdoors and don't think it has anything to do with his disappearance, though no one knows why he was in that area at that time of night. The problem that searchers and investigators have in Brett's case is that there's no clue as to what may have happened to him, in the time between his truck being found and his cell phone being picked up. Strangely, eyewitnesses came forward to say that they saw Brett's truck in the area of the walking track for more than 3 hours before it was driven away. But just a few minutes later, at around midnight, it returned again, and it isn't known whether Brett was the one driving. It's being speculated that Brett may have met with foul play, and his disappearance has now been labeled Operation Victor Falmouth by investigators, who are hopeful that they'll receive some indication as to what may have happened to him in the coming weeks. A search of the area was quickly organized, with police divers and sonar equipment being utilized to scour the Tinchitamba wetlands, as well as the Ironbark Gully walking tracks. But so far, no sign of Brett has been found. Since Brett's disappearance is considered suspicious, homicide detectives have joined the case since there's a chance that something untoward happened to him between the areas where his truck was found and where his phone was located. When the search for the missing man turned up no clues, it was ultimately suspended, but investigators have reiterated that the investigation into Brett's disappearance is still ongoing, and any leads that come in will be followed up on. Brett's family has stated that they're traumatized by his disappearance, and not knowing what may have happened to him has taken a toll on everyone involved. They made a public plea for anyone who saw Brett or knows where he may have gone after leaving the walking track to get in touch with the police, as they've run out of options in their efforts. They specifically asked anyone who saw Brett or his truck in the greater Brisbane area between the 11th and 19th of August to come forward, as any sighting may help investigators fill in the gaps in the timeline of his disappearance. Brett is described as being 5 foot 9 inches tall. He has blue eyes and short brown hair. His truck registration number is 354WAN. Along with his high visibility vest, he was last seen wearing a polo shirt, though the color has not been specified. The last time that 25-year-old Airly Garcia was seen was on the 22nd of September 2022, as she left her apartment in Salinas, California, to head out to work, and to this day, her mysterious disappearance remains unsolved. Airly comes from a large family with 7 children, though she is particularly close to 2 of her sisters, Veronica and Elizabeth, both of whom are her elders. They describe her as always being positive and having the ability to make you smile, even if you're having a bad day. At the time of her disappearance, Airly was living with her mother, but both Veronica and Elizabeth saw her in the week prior to her vanishing, with Elizabeth stating that she saw her on the 19th of September when she visited her mother's house to pick up a car seat. Veronica last spoke to the missing woman on the 22nd of September, after Airly texted her that morning at around 6 a.m. to wish her a good day, as they were in the habit of doing, and she's not had any contact with her since. Airly was working at a My Chevrolet dealership in Salinas, where she was employed as a service advisor. But on the morning of the 22nd of September, her manager contacted Elizabeth to ask if they knew where she was, as she'd not arrived for work at 7 a.m. as she usually does, which was very out of character. What is known is that Airly had headed to work that morning, since she was captured by surveillance cameras walking out of her mother's house at around 6:43 a.m. She can then be seen walking over to her red Honda Accord, unlocking the door and getting in before driving away. It's assumed that she was driving to work since she had a shift scheduled, and she texted one of her sisters shortly after leaving the house to say that that's where she was headed. When no further contact could be made with Airly, her family became concerned for her safety, and they decided to open a missing person case with the Salinas Police Department. The first step in the investigation into her disappearance was to check her phone records and bank account, but neither was of any use, as they hadn't seen any activity since she mysteriously vanished. Desperate for answers, her sisters decided to use the Find My app in an attempt to track Airly's phone, and they were shocked to learn that it was last located in Big Sur, which is at least an hour away from her home, and they couldn't think of any reason why she would have traveled there willingly. Her family also inspected her room to see if she may have left a note behind or if anything strange could be found, but everything was as it should be, and no further clues were found. They have grave concerns for her welfare, since she's almost constantly in touch with at least one of her family members to let them know where she is or where she's headed. Elizabeth and her husband decided to drive to Big Sur, where Airly's phone last pinged, and upon arriving there, they spotted her car, where it had been left by the side of the road. They found the car to be locked, but when police officers arrived at the scene, they unlocked it, and inside, Early's phone and other personal belongings, including her wallet and house keys, were discovered. A search was carried out in the surrounding area over the next 2 days by officers who searched on foot and with the use of a drone and an airplane, but they were unable to find any indication of where she may be. The search was repeated again with search dogs, but this also failed to shed any light on the case. Investigators questioned as many as 62 people in the hopes that someone may have seen Early or knew where she was headed, but this also failed to provide any clues. Despite the strange series of events in Early's case, authorities have stated that they don't believe she met with foul play, and a $10,000 reward for information is being offered to anyone who comes forward with information leading to her current whereabouts. Early is described as being 5 foot 6 inches tall, with brown hair and brown eyes. She weighs between 130 and 170 pounds, and can be identified by her cleft chin and the dermal piercings that are located on her chest. The last time she was seen, Early was wearing black leggings and a black hooded top. If you or anyone you know has information on Early's case, you're asked to contact the Salinas Police Department at 831-758-7393, quoting the agency case number 2209-0801. The family of 32-year-old Joshua Amos has reached out to the public for any information on where he could be after he inexplicably disappeared on the 19th of March, 2023, from Granite City in Illinois. Before going missing, Joshua started a new job at Precoat Metals in Granite City, but he'd only been employed there for about a month before he mysteriously disappeared. He also has 2 daughters, aged 8 and 11, though it isn't known whether he was in a relationship at the time of his disappearance. On Sunday, the 19th of March, Joshua and 3 of his friends decided to go out for the night, and they headed to Scarlett's Cabaret, an exotic club located in Washington Park. By the time the 3 men arrived, it was already past midnight, but they spent several hours inside. Strangely, Joshua decided to leave the club on his own at around 5 a.m., and he can be seen on CCTV security footage from outside the building as he did so. When his friends noticed that he wasn't in the building, one of them decided to look for him, and he can be seen walking through the parking lot as he searched, but he soon returned as there was no sign of Joshua. During the investigation into this strange case, a bus driver came forward to say that he had spoken to Joshua in East St. Louis, specifically at Jackie Joyner Kersey Center Station. She added that he looked confused, disoriented, and cold, and stated that he was trying to get home as quickly as possible. But Joshua didn't have a bus pass, and so the driver helped him purchase one. He then got on the bus and traveled to Emerson Park Station, where he was captured by CCTV cameras as he waited for his train. But strangely, the train arrived and left without Joshua getting on, and he would then be seen again as he walked around a parking lot near a motor transport company, a short distance away from the train station. Investigators checked the footage to see if he was being followed or if there were any cars nearby, but Joshua could be seen walking by himself with no one around, and they find it perplexing as to what happened to him after this. When he didn't arrive home later that morning, his family felt that something was wrong, and they opened a missing person case at the Washington Park Police Department. All attempts to make contact with Joshua had failed, and his family began to worry that something may have happened to him. As is usually the case, his bank records and credit cards were monitored, but they saw no activity, and his cell phone was of no use as he left it at home before heading out that night. To add to his family's concerns, they stated that Joshua suffers from bipolar disorder, and he'd been struggling with addiction in the months leading up to his disappearance, but they added that at the time, he was in the process of rehabilitation. Joshua's mother, Christine, told investigators that she spoke to him on the 17th of March, and he seemed in good spirits as they discussed his children, his new job, and the plans he had made for the upcoming weekend, but she's not heard from him since. She first learned that Joshua was missing when she received a call from her younger son, who informed her that Joshua had gone out with his friends the previous evening, and that they found no trace of him anywhere. The area around the club was thoroughly searched, along with the parking lot where Joshua was last seen, but nothing was found. A few people came forward to say that they saw Joshua in different areas around East St. Louis, but none of these tips led to anything, and Joshua remains missing. All in all, 5 searches were carried out with the help of police dogs, and a further 3 were conducted with cadaver dogs, but again, no sign of Joshua was found. At one point, a rumor started circulating that Joshua had been mugged while he was walking around that morning, but no evidence has been found to support this theory, and investigators have stated that they don't suspect any foul play in his disappearance, since he can be seen in security footage walking around by himself. Joshua is described as having brown hair and brown eyes. He weighs around 190 pounds and stands 5 foot 11 inches tall. He has several tattoos, including the names Bella and Mia on his chest, a Chinese symbol on his left bicep, and a few other tattoos on his right arm. A $10,000 reward is offered to anyone with information that leads to Joshua being found. And if you have such information, no matter how trivial, you're asked to contact the Illinois State Police at 681-346-3990. Alternatively, you can contact the Washington Park Police Department at 618-874-0115. Joshua's NamUs case number is MP102025. 19-year-old James Martin Roberts has been missing since the 21st of April 2016, and no trace of him has been found since. James, who originally hails from Kernersville in North Carolina, is said to be very close to his family, and at the time, he was living on campus at the Appalachian State University, where he started studying after he graduated high school. He was not attending classes at the university at the time, though, as he'd been suspended for underperforming. But he tried hard to make up for this by attending Caldwell Community College and Technical Institute online, in an effort to improve his GPA. He told his family that once he had done so, he planned to enroll at the Appalachian State University again, but he never got the chance to do so before he mysteriously disappeared. James's father told investigators that when he last spoke to him on the phone, James seemed as normal as always, and they made plans to have another phone call in the near future. Following that call, his father sent several text messages and attempted to call him, but he never answered his phone and didn't reply to any of the texts. His father then grew concerned that something may be wrong, and so he got in touch with his friends and the landlord of the fraternity house where he was staying, but they stated that they hadn't seen him and that they had no idea where he may have gone. He asked them to check James's room to see if he was there, but the only trace they could find of him was his credit card, cell phone, tablet, and wallet. They also found a note that had been described by investigators as cryptic, but the note has never been made public, and it isn't clear whether it has any bearings on his disappearance, though it is certain that he wrote it since it's in his handwriting. James's father did reveal some of the note's contents, stating that it said Josh regretted the fact that he hadn't made the most of the opportunities that he'd been given, and that he was planning on leaving. His father believes that this means he wanted to get away for a while. When they could find no further trace of him, James was reported missing by his roommates at the Boone Police Department on the 21st of April. Strangely, it was then discovered that James hadn't logged into any of his online courses for more than a month, and despite his friends stating that he had a job, no evidence was found to support this. When surveillance footage of the area was checked, James was seen at the Holmes Convocation Center of the Appalachian State University campus, where he was talking with his cousin. His cousin is then seen boarding a train, after which James simply walks away. This is the last time that anybody had contact with him, and it isn't clear where he may have been headed after that. While searches were being carried out, investigators found a bag of antidepressants in his room, for which he had no need, leaving them and his friend baffled, since they could think of no reason why he should have them. Surveillance cameras in the surrounding areas were also checked and monitored, but none of them captured any sign of James, and it was as if he simply vanished into thin air. While it's not in James's nature to be out of contact with his family for an extended period of time, investigators don't believe he met with foul play, as there is a chance that he simply decided to leave on his own. But his family is growing increasingly concerned, as he's been missing for 7 years at this point, and all leads in his case have been exhausted. James is described as having light brown hair and blue eyes. He stands 5 foot 10 inches tall, and at the time of his disappearance weighed 145 pounds. He also has 2 tattoos, the first being of a mountain on the inside of his left forearm, and the other is a set of lyrics from a Bob Marley song on his ribs. The last time he was seen, he was wearing an Appalachian State University windbreaker with a black t-shirt, khaki shorts, and gray shoes with white socks. He was also wearing a white gold visor on his head. If you know where James is or what may have happened to him, you're asked to contact the Boone Police Department at 828-268-6900. Alternatively, you can call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 800-843-5678. In many missing person cases, investigators state that they don't suspect any foul play, since it's likely that the person simply decided to leave on their own for whatever personal reasons they may have. But this isn't always the case, as is evidenced by the disappearance of Fiona Holm, a 48-year-old woman from London, England. In Fiona's case, investigators believe foul play is involved, and a suspect has been taken into custody, as they believe he's responsible. When Fiona was reported missing on the 29th of June, 2023, surveillance cameras in the area where she was last seen were checked, and they found footage of her as she shopped at a liquor store. In this footage, she can be seen wearing a dark jacket, brown top, and light-colored pants. She also has her hair tied up on top of her head. Nothing seems untoward in the CCTV image that was released to the public, and it would seem that at this point she wasn't in any danger. They found further surveillance footage showing Fiona walking alone along Verdant Lane, which is located in Catford, East London. But in this instance, she can be seen wearing a green top with dark pants or leggings, and shoes that could possibly be Converse. Investigators are looking to create a timeline of Fiona's movements that night, as they believe she's no longer alive, and they want to bring closure to her family by locating her remains. Fiona's family has appealed to anyone with information on where she was headed, or where her current whereabouts are to come forward, as they're unable to grieve properly until they know what happened to her and where she eventually ended up. Investigators revealed that a 63-year-old construction worker named Carl Cooper has been taken into custody in connection with her disappearance, and hence they're unable to reveal any specific information on the case. They have, however, added that they continued their search for Fiona to bring some closure to her family. Cooper has also been linked to another case, that of his 41-year-old girlfriend, Naomi Hunt, who was found deceased in Congleton Grove in Plumstead on the 14th of February in 2022. It's believed that he was responsible for her passing. The man is thought to have been in a relationship with Fiona at the time of her disappearance, and although he is still under investigation in Hunt's case, he was released on bail, and it's during this time that he's thought to have ended Fiona's life. The missing woman's bank records were checked but found no sign of activity since her disappearance, and investigators have stated that they believe she lost her life up to 9 days before she was reported missing. The prosecutor, Joel Smith, has stated that Fiona was reported missing when it was noticed that the food in her fridge, as well as her laundry in her washing machine, had started to turn moldy. Her family then decided to visit Cooper's house, and there they saw a parked van outside, with several of Fiona's clothing items inside. They questioned the driver of the van, who stated that he had bought the clothes from Cooper, and they decided to inform the police. Cooper was arrested, but he claimed that the clothing wasn't Fiona's, and that it belonged to someone else in the building. Initially, investigators treated Fiona's disappearance as a missing person case, but when she remained missing for an extended period of time and failed to make contact with her family, the Metropolitan Specialist Crime Command was asked to assist in the investigation. Since Fiona was well known in the Lewisham and Blackheath areas, her family and the investigating officers have asked anyone in those areas to come forward if they saw her during the time period that she went missing, around the 20th of June, as even the smallest lead could lead to her whereabouts. She was known as a friendly person who would always take time out of her day to have a conversation with people in the surrounding community. If you have any information on Fiona's case or know where she can be found, you're urged to contact Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. This call will be treated as confidential and completely anonymous if you prefer that your name isn't known. Alternatively, you can call 101 or tweet at METCC, quoting Fiona's case number, which is 22MIS023317. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.